from lunch, so you all made the right decision, and I did not. So we're moving us forward here, and we're going to move into the next item on the agenda, which is to get an update from HR assessment and procurement reform, and this addresses some of the gaps and challenges that staff have been dealing with over the last year. And before we tee that up, I'll turn it over to the city manager to make a few comments.
I have cookie crumbs on me. So the lunch that you enjoyed is obviously brought to you by Jose and Lynn. They've had the responsibility. They didn't cook it, but they ordered it and have put forward all of the logistics for making sure that we have goodies all day. So I just want to take an opportunity to thank them.
Round of applause for Jose and Lynn.
In between their other tasks, they're good caterers. So I also want to just acknowledge that this is a nuts and bolts conversation. We are below the hood in a car, looking at what's working, what's not, what needs oiling or kicking to see if the tires are pumped. And it reminds me that I made some comments around. There are areas that we know where we have not fared well in terms of providing support and resources for the organization to provide the appropriate services. And have we had those, we could accomplish magic. And I don't want that to get lost in the context of revealing the dirty laundry, shaking it out in public, because at the cornerstone of this is a very strong set of staff. They are highly committed and they are high performing. And it's both the staff that's been here and it's the staff that has newly arrived. And I have to keep that in context because this is a really courageous discussion about going below the hood. The next two topics, though, as I mentioned, our workforce needs to be a business imperative, and how we invest in our assets of our workforce and the skills and tools that we need in order to recruit and retain. There's two areas that I wanted to focus on, largely because they have been areas that bog us down with respect to keeping our vacancies filled and actively recruiting for them. And when we talked early on in my tenure with different departments and staff, the one key thing that came up very clearly is if you can make improvements in contracts and procurement management, we will gain capacity. And so these are two areas that we need to think of them as potential capacity builders for this organization. In light of the staffing challenges that we've talked about, this is part of the solution. And so I'm going to hand it off to Teresa, our HR director.
Thank you, Deanna. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council members. Teresa Zadroga-Haas, your Human Resources Director. So we're going to talk a little bit about the state of human resources. As you're aware, I've been with the city now for just about 4 months, and at the time that the slides were presented, we were really looking at my first 90 days here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my observations in the first 90 days. First of all, the team in HR is incredibly committed to this organization. Most of the team has been here, if not all, the majority of their careers. They love coming to work. They love providing services. They love the employees of this organization. I really couldn't ask for a more committed and dedicated team in that regard. But like most of the other departments that we'll be talking about, or what you've heard so far today, we're struggling with systems and procedures that are manual, outdated or antiquated workflow, undocumented procedures. And this really becomes apparent to me as coming in new to the organization and asking questions. Where's our authority for doing this, or why are we doing that? And what I hear are anecdotal information as to why we're doing something. And so it became very apparent to me that we're lacking in documentation, procedures, and it also puts us at risk for turnover within the department, which we're going to be talking about in a few minutes as well. The department is very transaction-based. We're not a strategic partner with our operating departments right now. We're so busy with our noses to the grindstone of just churning out the transactions that it takes to keep the work moving, keep recruitments going, keep labor negotiations going. So we're not looking at the bigger picture. It's very difficult to obtain and analyze data, again, because of our outdated or overly complex systems. To get simple reports requires staff to pull data from multiple systems and then manually compile it into a spreadsheet that potentially gives rise to errors, and we can't rely on the accuracy of our data. There's been some concerns in the past, which is one of the reasons that led to the organizational assessment that was commissioned by the city regarding payroll errors and a lack of internal controls, which we've been talking a lot about this morning. And then we've also talked, as Deanna mentioned, a lot about the lack of investment in employee development. So our people are our greatest asset. And it's people that deliver the services to this community. So it's very important that we invest in this asset. An effective and strategic HR department is able to effectively prepare the workforce to deliver the services to the city and to develop and administer programs that allow us to attract and retain quality employees. And so in my experience, what does this look like? We invest in training. This includes technical training, supervisory training, leadership development, career progression, risk management training. As public employees, I view all of us as risk managers, and this is a concept that you really have to instill in people, and everything they do, are we looking at it from any potential risk, upside or downside to the city? We need to develop safety programs to mitigate workplace injuries. We need to effectively manage our third-party administrators. So HR is responsible for administering the city's benefit plans, and a lot of the administration work is done through third-party administrators. So we need to aggressively market our benefit programs to make sure that we're getting the best bang for the buck. So these are all components that I would look at in assessing whether or not an HR department is effectively managing its programs. So as the city as a whole looks at transforming or evolving into a high-performing organization, a lot of the ability to do that is going to depend on effective internal service providers. Human Resources is one of those internal service providers to our operating departments. And so we're critical to the abilities, to the city's ability to increase organizational capacity. So given some of the issues that I've mentioned, the city made the decision to engage management partners to perform an organizational assessment of the department to identify our strengths and our areas of opportunity in our ability to support the organization as a whole. So the study was conducted in August of 2018, and in the August-September timeframe, a report was drafted. It was commissioned to address various issues. Some of these I've already mentioned. We were experiencing payroll errors, which creates a lot of administrative burden because we have to go back and correct those errors. Things like pay increases without proper authorization or documentation. Risk of potential HIPAA violations if personal information was being disclosed that shouldn't have been, and other documentation errors. And again, back to the internal control issues, making sure there's the appropriate checks and balances between payroll and human resources. So as the city as a whole began looking at, taking a closer look at our various practices or procedures, it became apparent that internal controls or checks and balances were not in place to prevent the errors or unauthorized transactions. So this was part of why the study was commissioned. So the process for the study was representatives from all the internal departments and all of HR, every member of the department was interviewed. There were focus group discussions with representatives from the 10 bargaining units. The consultant conducted an HR department workload survey, and then they reviewed various policies and procedures just to see where we were in terms of how out of date our policies may have been and or whether we were actually following what our policies were. So the key findings, first of all, it was unanimously reported back that HR staff are viewed as responsive and capable with a very strong customer service work ethic. but our focus has been on transactional processing, not strategic initiatives. So we're very limited, as I mentioned, by outdated and manual systems and our own past practices, many of which we can't even explain right now as to why it's a past practice. So we looked at that we need to be able to deliver more services and professional development and leadership training, both within the department and organizational wide. This was something that came through with the interviews from the various departments when they conducted the assessment, that our employees are hungry for leadership development type programs. So not only technical expertise in whatever their technical area may be, but long-term career planning, mentoring programs, all of the things that would help build capacity within the operating departments as well. Our HR payroll system, PeopleSoft, is not well utilized. There's a lot of functionality that we have not implemented, and what has been implemented is not necessarily industry standard. So we've got a lot of work to do in that area. And then the current workload, again, as I mentioned, we're so transactional based, and our workload is such that we just don't have the capacity right now within the department to really look at what we have to do to transform and to be able to make that effort. My staff is just stretched to the max. So we're looking at ways that we can bring in some temporary resources, some consulting projects maybe to work on the payroll system, which would be a joint effort between payroll and human resources. So we're looking at all options that are available in terms of building capacity. And then we severely are lacking in resources in the department in two key areas, and that's our employee and labor relations and our training and development. So we've talked about that pretty extensively. I wanted to mention also that since even these slides were prepared, that we've had, I have a staff of 15, including my position, and 4 of which are management positions, mine included, the director included. And I've had turnover in all 3 of the other management level positions. So when I came on board, I had a division manager position vacant already. My assistant director has subsequently left the city, and my last remaining division manager, her last day is next week. So employees are leaving for work-life balance reasons, lesser commute, and more money in other agencies. So it's a huge amount of change for the department to absorb in a very short period of time. But on the bright side, significant change usually will bring a lot of opportunity for fresh perspectives, fresh ideas, and new ways of looking at things. So we're excited about the future, but we do have some effort to just get to the point of being staffed, fully staffed, so we can start looking at some of these other initiatives. The organizational assessment yielded over 65 recommendations in the areas that you see here, both staffing levels and the organizational structure, recruitment and selection processes, our class and comp processes, employee and labor relations, training and development, employee benefits, our equal employment opportunity processes, and then our policies and procedures. So again, 65 significant recommendations. So we have probably enough work to do for the next 5 years, if we can get fully staffed. Right. So on the 6-month horizon, so as I mentioned, the other division manager position, so I now have 2 to fill, but what we're focused on right now is just assessing our workload distribution, trying to right the ship a little bit in terms of who's doing what. The workloads seem to be a little bit unevenly balanced throughout the department, so we may be looking at redeploying some of the resources. I filled the management analyst vacancy, so that was good news. Thank you, Council, for approving the upgrade of an existing position to management analyst last year. We got that position filled. That person started a couple weeks ago, and we're very excited about him. And then establishing priorities and identifying the long-term implementation plan for those 65 recommendations. But right now, the focus has to be on just getting fully staffed. I've done a recruitment for the division manager position, which yielded no viable candidates. So we're going to have to go back out, it looks like, and now I'll be recruiting for both division managers. And with an action that will be coming to council next week at your meeting, I'm hoping that we may be able to offer a little bit more in terms of salary. So what are the next steps? So first and foremost, the organization, not just the department, but the organization as a whole, has to commit to an investment in change. And investment in human resources is important because it is an investment in the whole organization. So we affect the entire organization. We need to be able to lead and support high-quality, cutting-edge organizational development because it's the people here, it's our employees that are going to transform this organization, but only if we give them the tools and support they need to do that. And we hope to be able to lead the transformation by recruiting, supporting, and retaining the staff needed to do it. So we're going to need to prioritize key areas. Again, with 65 significant recommendations, we can't do them all at once. And we need to look at how we can provide the biggest impact, especially in our critical staffing areas around engineering, our public safety positions, and our electric utility division. So we're in a very, as you know, competitive, high-demand workforce. And our organization is going to require some innovative recruitment and organizational support techniques, I think. We are going to need to establish priorities on how we're going to invest in HR and develop that work plan. So as I mentioned, we'll have a year 1 through year 5 implementation plan based on the organizational assessment recommendations that we got from management partners. And then we need to identify the necessary resources and investment required just to maintain current service delivery while we're doing all this other work. And I'm not just talking about investment in human resources per se, but in programs, human resources related programs that will empower us in this competitive labor market to attract and retain talent. So some of those examples, we've talked about training, and professional development, some work-life balance programs. Deanna mentioned creating attractive spaces for our employees to team and rest and recreate a little bit while they're here at work, make it a little more pleasant to be here at work. We may want to look at things like relocation benefits. Given that we're in such a high cost of living area, we're finding that that's a barrier to people accepting employment with us. Is just the cost of relocation. We need to look at what does it take for us to become an employer of choice, and then we need to invest in leadership training systems and civic center workspace. Like every other department, we're short on space in HR. I think our space could be reconfigured a bit. We could expand our workspace a little bit, but again, that would take an investment in capital improvement funds. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he can talk about procurement reform. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Mark Giovanetti. I'm the purchasing manager. Let's see, I better get queued up with this. It's not going to do it by itself. So, just to get started, it's not just about purchasing. We actually have too far away. Usually people don't have a problem hearing me. How's that? Better?
Is the microphone on? Is it
yes.
actually on? Okay.
So even closer? Because sometimes I just didn't want to blast people, that's all.
Sometimes they don't work as well as others, so.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
So it's not just about purchasing. There's 4 functional areas that we're responsible for. First and foremost, there's centralized purchasing, and it's defined as the code. In the code, the municipal code, centralized purchasing is responsible for the oversight of the purchase of supplies, material, equipment, professional services, and non-professional services. It excludes construction. So Public Works, for purposes of our initial set of reforms, is excluded. Maybe purchasing reforms, the sequel down the line, we'll work with Public Works and we'll begin to take on some of the construction bidding. Surplus property, so as you can imagine, in the course of daily operations, we have assets that we retire. Either they're broken, they've reached the end of their useful life, the department that owns them no longer has a need. We need to get rid of them. We need to sell them. So our first goal would be to repurpose them, see if there's another home for them in the city where somebody can use the item. Otherwise, there's a process by which we go about selling it. So you've got purchasing on the buy low and surplus property on the sell high concept going there. And then the central warehouse staff reports into purchasing. The central warehouse is located over on Martin Avenue. They stock about 2,000 items in their inventory to support the field crews, primarily for water and electric utilities. And last but certainly not least is contract management. Met with our two new contract managers, Jay Coleman, you've met, most of you have met, and then Grace Doherty, you met this morning. Met with the police chief a couple of weeks ago, and he asked what the function is. A very good question. And my answer, and we're defining it as we go along, but my answer is they're responsible really for the end-to-end process, from the actual solicitation, working with our internal clients to write a solid solicitation that would include specification developments and so on and so forth, facilitating the procurement, working with them to make sure that the procurement is done in a proper manner, and then writing the contract. Because it is a progression. You do draw from the proposal, from the request for proposal, you pull elements of those into the contract and then execute the contract. So whenever I talk about purchasing and developing a purchasing program, I always like to come back to the foundation. You always want to satisfy these three tenets, foundation, whatever you want to call them, of public purchasing, any purchasing policy, but in particular public purchasing. The more dollars we're talking about, so if it's $1.5 million contract, the level of scrutiny that you satisfy these three tenets becomes even greater. They're always important, but again, the higher the dollars, the higher the level of scrutiny. So with competition, you want to make sure that, I think everyone understands that competition is good, it's healthy. We want to make sure that specifications are not written unnecessarily restrictive, so on and so forth. We want to make sure that there's easy access to our solicitations, that vendors are notified, and then it's easy to obtain not only the document, but any addenda subsequent to documents that we publish. And then transparency. So you get 4 proposals in, it's a bid, and you award to the high bidder. That's probably not a very transparent process. You want to make sure that you can defend that vendor selection, that you have followed an objective process. It was the process that you laid out in the bid document and established some degree of comfort that it was truly a best value procurement or a low bid in the case of a bid. So I've been here about 8 months. After the first 3 months, 90 days, the city manager asked me for an assessment. We sat down, and this is what we went over. The purchasing is very, very highly decentralized, and there's degrees of decentralization. So there's nothing wrong with having elements of the purchasing function performed by our client departments with centralized guidance and oversight. Here it was taken to the next level. It was decentralized literally with no desktop procedures, with no training. The departments all wanting to do a very good job, very, very conscientious, had very, very little guidance. When you decentralize it, another outcome of that can be that you're not leveraging your spend. So everyone's buying, they're buying the same thing, they're buying it at different parts of the city. So you generate excessive transactions because you can centralize these purchasings perhaps with a citywide contract. And then individual purchases, you buy 20 of something one at a time. It's not as effective as buying 20 at the same time. You can get better unit pricing. So we might be foregoing that opportunity. We are foregoing those opportunities. There were manual processes, especially with e-bidding. There's e-procurement tools that are out there. There are opportunities to come up with a more automated process to sell our surplus. We'll get to that in a minute. You know, as a result of the decentralization and the lack of training, so much of purchasing fell on the attorney's office. Not only to write agreements, but they were getting very involved in writing procurement templates. They were auditing the client department, bringing them an agreement. How did this purchase come to be? And Brian presented all this legal stuff that they're doing, and that's definitely something that they with a professional purchasing staff, they shouldn't have to worry about. And then there are opportunities to implement several key procurement best practices, and we'll get to those when I start to talk about the reforms. Examples would be bidding threshold, delegation of authority, so on and so forth. So to continue, the requisition to cycle times, very long. Several reasons for that. And I would talk when I was go out and meet with the departments, well, it takes forever in the attorney's office. Sure, because we layered purchasing on top of all the lawyer stuff they're supposed to be doing. Insurance was a problem. Many things also were on contracts going to the attorney's office that didn't need to be on agreements. They totally appropriate for simple services and certainly all product to be on purchase orders, but that wasn't happening. The purchasing code's very confusing. I would show us sections of the code to 3 different people and get 3 different outcomes as to what it meant. There should be a greater separation of duties between the department requesting the product or service and the sourcing, the ultimate vendor selection. So right now, with this decentralization, you've got the client department identifying the need, doing the outreach, the quoting or the bidding, selecting the vendor, entering the purchase order into the system, and purchasing that evolved into a maintenance function would essentially approve their work. They would look to see that there were 3 quotes there, but how much examination of the quoting was going on, probably not very much. If you have a cumbersome process, a process people don't understand, it leads to maverick buying. So if a vendor's willing to deliver a product or perform a service without a contract, a purchase order, a contract, we'll pay them. So that's fraught with pitfalls for obvious reasons. It's very, very risky to do business that way, so we're going to shore up that. And then we're invisible. This says vendor community. It really should be the business community, where I don't think they know about us, what we buy, how to buy, how they can be eligible to be awarded our business. So, I can see in the future maybe an opportunity for how to do business with the city, engaging with our business community, especially our local business community. So just didn't want to keep adding to the list, so we wanted to check a few things off. So the organization has the organization has been nothing but supportive in helping me get a very, very qualified and professional staff, not only to implement the reforms we're going to talk about, design a new purchasing program and implement those reforms, but also succession planning being very important. You'll find no better contract managers than the ones we just hired. So the future of purchasing at this organization is left in very good hands. So I'm very, very optimistic and pleased about that. Gov deals, I had mentioned surplus property. The warehouse staff, nobody really knew how to get rid of it. Nobody wanted it. There was everything. There was 2 pianos over there. There was saws. There was exercise equipment. There's fleet that's just located over in the garage. So we implemented gov deals, which can best be described as eBay for government surplus. That's what it does. We implemented that, again, low-hanging fruit. As of a few months ago, we sold 60K. I think on the system, I think we implemented it. It went live, I think in the fall, maybe September or October. The only thing we don't do, where it's different than eBay, is we don't ship. So somebody buys something, they come and pick up. GovDeals handles the rest. All of the buyer-seller transactions, the buyer-seller inquiries, they collect the money. It doesn't cost us anything. The buyer pays GovDeals directly 10% of whatever the final bid price was. And that's added. It doesn't come off. That's added to the bid price. We're starting to expand the use of purchase orders. I mentioned earlier, way too many things are done on contracts. And that's the code. Basically, if they come on site and it's greater than 5K and perform a service, it has to be on an agreement. So that immediately triggers a review of our attorneys. And again, it's just a lot of documents going through there that they shouldn't need to see. We have the program designed for citywide trainings on contract development and contract management. They're starting to schedule the classes now. We anticipate the end of March they're gonna start having the actual classes, and these will be classes to our clients on how to write contracts, how to develop a good scope of work, and how to develop a good compensation schedule, payment schedule. And also the appropriate exemplar to use, because there's different forms of agreements for different types of services. And then we've implemented some new bid templates. There was one size fits all, and again, it was designed by the attorney's office. It was good, but it was for everything. And having specific bid templates for the type of product or service we're buying makes it easier for the vendors. It makes it easier for staff to populate those templates. So we've been doing that. We have a new request for qualifications, request for solutions, template, request for proposal, quotes, that kind of thing. So this is just a quick visual. GovDeals looks like that. It's a public website. And this is what the public would see. And just like eBay, you can see the number of bids when the bid closes. If you click on it, you can get a description of the asset, more pictures, things of that nature. And then whoever's interested can ask questions, and we can arrange for viewings of some of the items if they want to see the condition. But here you can see some exercise equipment. Fire department bought new exercise equipment, so they had this surplus, so they're buying that. So we're listing that. And then there's a couple of vehicles there. 28 bids, 7 bids, so on and so forth. And then here's just a screenshot so that you can get a visual appreciation of the bid notification system, BidSync. So we're migrating to it now. Eventually, hopefully all of our solicitations will be noticed through BidSync, and it really facilitates the process. So it's a push system. It will push out the notification to vendors that are registered on the system. It's widely used by government agencies. There's probably 10,000 vendors that are registered on the system. Where it really generates additional competition is for product, because product you can really deliver from anywhere. Services tends to be local, because most of the time you have to be fairly local to come on site to perform the service, especially if it's a recurring service. But again, it'll really enhance the outreach for any type of solicitation. So opportunities, just want to lead off. Purchasing does touch everything from soup to nuts, literally from office products to capital equipment to professional, non-professional services. So hiring contract managers with such diverse backgrounds really helps, because they've touched many, many different commodities. I'm still working on a definition of what the business model is going to be. It's certainly not going to be decentralized the way it was. I don't know if we can fully centralize it. I'm not sure it makes sense, but I'm not sure that there's the staff. There's just hundreds, thousands of transactions, and I'm finding new places where they are every day, new ways to purchase. So all the purchases aren't in one place. I can't figure out what the volume is, so I don't want to say everything comes through central purchasing and then just be the bottleneck of worse than bottlenecks exist today. And then we'll work on a revision of the purchasing code and bring it back to council in the spring. And here's some things that we're not going to solve them today, but I'm thinking about. And the first one, it would be the delegation of authority to the manager. So right now, the city manager can enter into contracts without council approval. I think it's up to up to $100,000 for some things and $150,000 for other departments. That seems low. And, I would ask, does council really want to see a purchase order of any value for routine maintenance services or routine MRO supply purchases and things of that nature? So we'll look at that. Local business preferences. Right now, the preference is 1%. Do some polling. Maybe we ought to consider a different preference. 1% of a bid, it really doesn't even apply to a best value type of a purchase. It's really a low price, a bid, where 1% consideration is given for local. Maybe we want to look at that. We'll look at the formal bidding thresholds. So again, the higher the dollars, the higher the level of scrutiny. And at some point, that triggers a formal procurement. Right now, our thresholds seem low. There's formal and informal. Informal doesn't mean you can do anything you want. It just means that the noticing period is less. It's just not quite as comprehensive as a formal bid. Concepts are all there. So the feds are at 150. I'm going to start with that for the formal bid threshold. We're down at, I think, 50 and 100, something like that. It just seems very low. We'll look at a protest process. We currently don't have one. We've implemented one for it. We introduced one for the convention center RFP, but maybe we'll institutionalize a protest process to give vendors who think that, for any reason, if they were treated unfairly, an opportunity to vet their concerns. And then there's a reference in the code about green purchasing, EP3, environmentally friendly purchasing, or environmentally preferable purchasing. A policy around greening our procurements, being good stewards of the environment, setting an example. So I noticed our copy paper has no recycled content. A member of the public spoke to that earlier as well. So there's definitely things we should be looking at. Fleet, I know they have, a lot of our vehicles in fleet, they've got green vehicles, electric vehicles they're buying. IT. EPEAT standards, Energy Star standards, but let's make sure that that's institutionalized. We have a policy and everyone throughout the organization is purchasing to those standards. And we're always looking for opportunities to green. So then on contracts managed, definitely the writing effective contracts class. At some point, we'll also work with our client departments. There's good project managers throughout the city. Partner with them. How do you manage a contract? And that gets a little bit out of the purchasing contract development phase, but let's not approve invoices if the work wasn't performed, that kind of thing. And of course, managing a contract is made much simpler if you have a good, solid foundation, a contract to manage. Not to say that a good contract can't go bad, but dispute resolution, it's much easier if you have a well-written, clearly defined contract. Contract repository, I said I couldn't find all the purchases. Contracts, somebody had mentioned earlier, the contracts are everywhere. BidSync does have a contract repository feature, but I'm hearing Laserfish. I just want to figure out what the tool is we're going to use, and then we'll go ahead and formalize that and introduce it in the organization. And then I want to continue the use of purchase orders. Because again, a purchase order is a form of agreement, and most products, many services make total sense to be on purchase orders. It'll streamline the process. And then I think I have a bullet looking at blanket purchase orders. So I mentioned, we'll do 20 purchase orders with Grainger for the same thing over the course of 3 months. Why isn't that on one purchase order, and we can just order off that blanket purchase order as we need it? Again, 20 purchase orders, 20 transactions, it's that kind of thing. Process integrity guidelines and ethics were introduced for the convention center RFP. We'll institutionalize that. So we'll bake that into our policies, that communication protocol, conflict of interest concerns, what those are and how they're addressed to make sure they're averted with any of our procurements. So we'll write new policies and procedures. So once we have a code, the outcome of a new purchasing code would be the desktop procedures, how to run it day to day. And then we'll follow that with trainings. So not, client departments, here's what to expect, here's what we're looking for, here's your responsibility, here's what we're going to do for you. The warehouse, again, antiquated systems, they certainly use the legacy PeopleSoft for their inventory management, but all of their inventory is keyed in and out of PeopleSoft to keep track of it. Barcode systems aren't complicated, they're not expensive. We'll be looking at implementing a barcode system for the warehouse. I want to online and also a hard copy, how to do business with the city guide for our vendors. People that come in, it can be out on the counters and things they can take on. It'll also be on the purchasing website that we'll develop. And then I'll work with Greg to see if we can, definitely we'll streamline. We already have streamlining ideas about insurance compliance and insurance approvals. Again, a good contract professional purchasing team, our contracts managers, they know when prevailing wage is required, they know what insurance is required, they know how to review an insurance certificate. So let's take advantage of this professional staff that we're hiring and streamline our processes.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So now we open it up for council question, Q&A, and discussion. Mayor Gilmore.
Thank you, and thank you for both those presentations. Very, again, eye-opening. I want to ask Angie, Teresa. I'm looking right at Angie, and I meant Teresa.
Angie's up next.
You said financial, that's next, so I'm looking at her. With Teresa, I know that we've had concern in the past, and it's obvious to me that it's a real issue for us, just our overall recruiting efforts in Santa Clara. And I know right now you're just you're working on transaction after transaction, and you haven't, sounds like your department hasn't had a real opportunity to take a breath and with the appropriate amount of staff to say how proactive can we be in terms of all of these recruitments from, public safety to your department, and that, because it's obvious to me that we really have to beef up our overall recruiting, and the council needs to have very realistic goals and expectations as to, the new positions that we need and what the marketplace is for these positions. And, Santa Clara in the past, we've always, we've paid well, we've offered great benefits and other things, and then the economy sort of took off, and maybe we're left a little bit behind. So, what do we have to do to go out there and market ourselves and be able to attract, the highest level of quality employees like we have in the past? And is that something that's on your radar for now, or are you in just the stabilizing mode to fill your positions and get to the next level where you're a little bit more proactive? And is it your department that is responsible for, or would be responsible for, helping us with the overall city recruiting?
Yes, the answer, I think, to all of that is yes. I think there's we're dealing with a number of pressures that aren't necessarily all in within our control. We need to get creative, and I don't want to imply that we haven't already made some transactional and process changes to streamline things, where we've implemented NeoGov. One of the reasons, as Deanna mentioned, the number of applications that we receive has significantly increased is because we've made it a lot easier for people to apply because they can do it online. So it's a double-edged sword in that respect, because we've improved technology and we're doing it online, but it's resulting in a larger workload for human resources with virtually the same amount of staff. So immediately we're in triage mode to just keep things moving right now and to get fully staffed. But the plan is we need to look at how we can innovate and get creative about recruitment initiatives. And we need to be able to balance that with the restrictions that we as a public sector employer have. We have to deal with, first of all, we're a civil service system. So we are greatly restricted in how we can approach employment practices based on our merit system. But within that, we have to find ways to get innovative and creative, and we can do that. We just have to have the resources to be able to do that analysis and develop some recommendations, look at best practices, what are other agencies. We're not the only agency dealing with this in this labor market, in this region. And so I think we can garner a lot of synergy by talking to our neighboring agencies as well. So we have that issue we're dealing with. We have the labor issue that we're dealing with. We're at the table with half of our bargaining units. We're struggling with some structural things within our compensation structure. The city historically has not put money in benefits. It's gone to wages, and that makes us very competitive in terms of our wages, but makes us not so attractive from a recruitment and retention perspective when employees look at what we provide in terms of benefits. But yet we're struggling with that at the table, for various reasons. We can talk about in closed session. But so we have that external pressure, that additional pressure. And then we have the huge body of state and federal legislation pertaining to public sector employees that we also have to deal with. So there are a lot of restraints, but there's, I think, a lot we can do if we can free up the capacity and the brain power within the department to look at what we can do that's a little bit outside the box in attracting and retaining. I want to mention the fire department just previewed to me some fantastic videos that they're gearing up to put out on social media for recruiting. We're gearing up for a firefighter recruitment, and that's a huge effort. And we're expecting literally 1,500 applications probably in a very short period of time. But what they've done is a wonderful job in creating some videos to do outreach that target specific, target females, target different ethnic situations, and also kind of show that you don't have to come from a traditional sort of firefighter background. I mean, there's people from all walks of life that join the profession and have been very successful. So I'm really excited about that, and it'll be interesting to see how that impacts this upcoming recruitment process.
Yeah,
so that's kind of a long-winded
yes.
answer, but.
No, I heard about the fire department, and I was hoping we could do something like that in the police department. These really more non-traditional but modern now ways of connecting out there, but that maybe don't cost a lot of money either. They're a good, cost benefit. And also, thank you. I know that's going to be a key for us is attracting, retaining, and making sure we're competitive. So thank you for that. Mark, I had a question for you, and again, thank you for your presentation. Before you started your work here in Santa Clara, were each department doing their own procurement for goods and services for the city and doing their own contracts? It sounds like everything was bought, ending up in the city attorney's office, a lot of that work, but what was happening before if there was no centralized purchasing system there?
Before I came to this city?
Yes.
My old city?
No, from this city, yes.
So again,
who was doing this work before you started?
The departments.
Each department was doing their own procurement?
Yeah. And trying to figure it out, and they're very grateful for any help they get now to help them.
Yes.
Correct.
So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to increase our efficiencies and potentially save a lot of money for the city. This is, pardon me, city manager?
And build capacity.
Yes, especially in the city attorney's office.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it's really, when I came here, I was shocked to find out what the attorneys here were doing, in that if you look at just in terms of good business practice in a private company, no private company would have their general counsel's office doing the stuff that our attorney's office was doing. It was a complete waste of that professional capacity and professional talents for our office to be writing individual RFPs, writing individual contracts. It's really extremely inefficient and a poor use of the professional capacity of the people that we're paying. And so I immediately, said, we've got to stop doing this. It's not our job to write an RFP. It certainly is our job to provide legal advice about writing RFPs, but writing RFPs doesn't make sense. Writing individual contracts each time you purchase whatever, it doesn't make any sense. So we're really trying to get non-legal work out of the attorney's office. A lot of private companies have contract managers who are not contract negotiators who are not attorneys. They're just experts in how do you write a contract. That's all.
Well, I also just want to interpret that from the admin side, and let's just use like the library as an example. Same analogy, that you're hiring skilled professional librarians or staff with their discipline that they come in through civil service, and they're charged with suddenly writing contracts, doing RFPs, or navigating through complex insurances. And they weren't hired for those skills, and they're learning and getting by.
And there seems to be, without the expertise, a huge duplication of efforts and no consistency, I think, in all of our contracts and that. So the way it's set up now, it's going to be a huge burden off of our individual departments and clearing up a lot of much needed time in our city attorney's office. I think that the suggestions you had about reaching out to the business community for savings for the city, ultimately local, the sustainable procurement and all that. I think that streamlining this will really save us a lot of time, money, and effort. So thank you very much. I'm very optimistic after seeing all this. Thank you. Teresa?
Councilmember O'Neill, and then we'll go to Councilmember Hart.
So I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on that, because I kind of had a conversation with a couple of staff, like people that were new, and I'm like, oh, so how's it going? How do you like your job? And all that. And so that's how I found out about the decentralized model, shall we call it. And so, not to reiterate everything what was said, but one of my thoughts was, well, we've been talking about how we need to make sure that we have expertise in these certain categories. And as I was listening to a couple of these folks that have those special, those expertise, and we were asking them not to spend all their time focused on that area, but to learn how to do procurement and do those other things and all of that. So it's always that challenge on where on the spectrum you're going to be between centralized and decentralized. But once again, from what I was hearing, we were way out on one end of the spectrum that nobody knew of any other entity around here that was still using that kind of model. And I think once again, it gets back to thinking, okay, we can get more out of people by just adding on these extra duties to them, instead of saying, okay, we're going to bite the bullet and do what we need to do to have a professional procurement function and a professional finance function and a professional HR, instead of taking kind of these ancillary duties and just adding them on to things that other people thought they were being hired to do.
Very good. Councilmember Hardy?
Yes, this is for Mark. I had one question. In fact, this is a quote from your slide. Need greater separation of duties between requester and sourcing. I want to make certain I understand that comment, because I work for the school district, and I will write up an order, and then I get questioned over and over from each person. It goes through the level as to why I needed it. And there's not an expertise along those lines. When it's something like paper towels, I understand. I guess I was working with some electronics. And my concern is, you just said you needed greater separation of duties between requester and sourcing. Is that to help us centralize so we can watch our cost? But I also worry about someone not understanding what they're buying, and then I see waste in other ways.
The greater separation, you just need to be careful that you need to be careful and avoid conflicts of interest between the requester, who is just selecting the vendor, following a process that is not defined. So generally, the requester comes to purchasing with a requirement, and it can be for a product, and then generally, in order to generate competition or equal, we'll go ahead and buy that product or anything equivalent to it, and then we'll put it out to bid, quote, bid, whatever the solicitation method is, and then it will be awarded to the low bidder. That's one process. Another process, if it's for a service, you would follow a similar process, and then you would work with the client department to establish the best value to award it to, with price being one of the elements, but not the only element. That's typically the way it works for services, although some services are defined enough to where you can do low price as well. But when you have one person doing it all, that's fraught with risk, because you don't really know what their source, you don't know what their solicitation document is. You don't necessarily know how they're arriving at the decision that they're arriving at, and that's what you want to try to avoid. That there's not, a family member that they're awarding it to, a business owned by family, things of that nature. So that's what I meant by that.
Okay.
Brian?
I worried that the word separation maybe wasn't the best term. You meant more of a transparency and a clear process.
Correct.
Okay.
And again, this decentralized versus centralized, if the department does it, they would follow a prescribed purchasing process, and they would have to be able to defend that process. There would be oversight of that process by your central purchasing organization. So, does that answer your question?
Good.
Brian?
And just another way of looking at it is this. Purchasing, anybody involved in making a final purchasing decision is going to have to be subject to California Conflict of Interest Code, because at that point they're making a government decision, and they're going to be filing a Form 700. So when you have this incredibly diffuse, decentralized purchasing way of doing things here, I suspect that a lot of people that are making final purchasing decisions aren't even aware of what the Conflict of Interest Code requires. And, we haven't really delved into, who made purchases and why, and whether they should have filed Form 700s and been aware of their Conflict of Interest Code requirements. But I think now that we're moving away from that and having a more accountable system of why we made a purchase and who made the final decision, and having a rational decision-making process, I think that that's another good reason for not having such a diffuse way of purchasing things. And it kind of goes along the same concept of having the checkbook where anybody can walk in the room and take the check. So we're doing our best to get into an area, a much greater accountability, so that we can tell the public, we're doing our job and making sure these things are done the right way.
Good. Questions, comments? Councilmember Davis?
Teresa, I'm back to you. Okay. Let's talk about like this. So my question to you is, not only are cities losing good people to the private sector because they've got the benefits and what's going on right now. So in a good economy, they're going to go to the private sector. Then when the economy slips a little bit, they kind of go back to us and say, oh, but you got the better benefits. So there's like a movement of people going to what is the better deal and where am I going to get it? With the Silicon Valley, it's almost like we're kind of like killing ourselves, because we want the people, we want to engage with good quality employees, but at the same time, what I'm hearing out there, it's the cost of living. I mean, is there some way that we can figure out, it's the housing, where they're going to live? I mean, and I think, and to attract that person back to us, that seems to be what I'm hearing, that they can't afford to live here, or it's almost like, I don't want to say, like the tech companies said, we never thought we'd be in the transportation business, but is it come to the point where the city of Santa Clara might have to go into the housing business, to a point where, to make it attractive to people to come here? I know that they want to come here, but it's like, I can't afford to be here. And I was just talking to somebody at the Santa Clara University. They are losing their top professors right now because they can't afford to live here. They had one guy come in, 6 months later, he could not find a place to live. So when you said creative ability, I don't know how far we can take that, but is that part of something that is possible that we can do?
Sure, it's certainly something we can look at. We can look at what other agencies are doing. We can develop informational reports for council, but ultimately it will come down to a policy decision as to whether that's a direction that council wants to go. But we could certainly explore that.
Yeah, to make it a little bit more attractive, because as far as like public safety goes, they're recruiting, it seems like there's some like engineers or whatever in public safety. We seem to always be recruiting that type of person. So that's why I was wondering if we could make a little sweeter on our end of the world to get them in here. Mark, I think that you sold $60,000 worth of goods here, so I guess you paid for half your salary, I'm not really sure. I'm glad to hear that some of the paper is getting out of the attorney's office, because it seems that everything seems to land in your office. I don't know why, Brian. You're like a magnet for paper. So with that being said, so Mark, you're basically the air traffic controller who will kind of, let's say, centralize our department heads for purchasing, correct? So we'll have a form that everybody follows, and we'll have a process that everybody follows, so that you will have more control of what's coming in and going out. Is that the plan here? Is that what I got out of this?
Correct. Everyone,
Okay.
there should be the same look and feel. Everyone should be using the same documents, the same templates. Correct.
Okay, so part of your job will be to train everybody in this, as the new guy, so to speak?
Yes.
Because we have never had people, there's a lot of new employees, but the ones that we're bringing in are the ones that are jobs, the gap hole that the city manager talks about, and you're one of my gap hole guys, and Lynn over here. I mean, it's like amazing how all of a sudden you like peel the onion back again, and here we go. So, are you going to cross-train also with every department? I mean, how does this work?
Everyone buys, so yes.
Everyone. Okay, so you're the guy. Okay, congratulations on your job.
Thank you.
We'll hear about you in another 6 months, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Update. But thank you.
Very good. Any other questions from council before we move on? Councilmember Watanabe?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions, because trying to talk about things that haven't been talked about. Teresa, you mentioned about you're receiving a lot of applications, and there's a lot of time that goes into reviewing them. There is software out there that will review applications. Is there not that you think you could filter out the applications that don't fit the job description? I mean, has the city looked into anything like that, or is it something that would help?
We have not looked into that. I think before we would go down, that takes a lot of the flexibility out of the process if you try to automate something like screening applications, especially because of a lot of our positions have equivalency factors. It's not cut and dry what minimum qualifications might be. Also, a lot of the programs you're talking about are doing screening on more like a resume, where it's using OCR to screen for certain words and things like that, which would not necessarily be effective with the city application process. And I had another point I was going to make. Before we look at anything like that, what I would prefer to do is fully utilize NeoGov, which is our online application process, and we can look at streamlining the recruitment process even further, doing that, and we can also implement a system that will allow us to track and check for training and certifications that are required for positions. So that would really help with our internal promotional type of recruitments as well, because we'll have a record. Right now, we don't have a record of which employees have which certifications and which certifications have to be renewed. So I think that would be an area that we could get a tremendous boost in our ability to help the departments manage their workforce if we could just track training and certifications. So that's probably one of the first areas I want to look at.
Great, okay. And then just one other question. Does the city offer college reimbursement as part of a benefit? Yeah.
Funny you should ask, because we're just getting ready to launch a new program that Kendra has been very instrumental in pulling together. So we've revamped our tuition reimbursement policy. We're rolling that out. So yes, we do reimburse for outside education. And then we're also starting a program, and Kendra, you'll have to correct, Civic Scholars, where we're actually partnering with a provider that will allow full-time working professionals to further their career without even having to put the money out in advance. So it's a program that's funded through the city.
Great.
So we've had a lot of inquiry about that. I think our employees are really excited about that. We'll be rolling that out soon, within the next couple weeks, I believe.
Sounds like a good way to retain good employees and promote from within as well. And then, Mark, 2 questions, I think. The surplus property. Right now, is there a policy in place or a tracking system? You know, what is in the warehouse and because I know you mentioned about the barcode system, but do we know right now what is in the warehouse?
When product comes into the warehouse, surplus items, it's going to go on a spreadsheet. It'll be on the intranet so that departments can see it and claim it if they have a use for it, request it. After a period of time, and that's still variable, maybe 30, 60 days, depending on what it is, then we'll go ahead and list it on GovDeals. Okay. So I guess that was a long answer to your question. Yes, it's on a spreadsheet.
Great. Okay. No, I think it's a great opportunity, you know, to make some money for the city and in terms of in the process of repurposing, you know, city property. So that's good to know. So and then just the risk assessment as well. I think this is based on what you were saying, this is another, wonderful reason that we have a risk assessor now, to review these policies and decisions that are being made in the different departments. So yeah, definitely things are coming together in the city and the right people are being put in place. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Great. Other questions? Council member?
Thank you for your reports. Like, I know you have been on job just for 90 or some days, and a pretty good grasp of where we were and where we want to be, basically. That's good. Especially knowing that the management partner study has 65 points where we need to improve that thing. And it's a good pointer to learn where we were and how we can improve on those things, basically. And a couple of questions for Mark, basically. Bid sync, like, do you have some good past experience with the bid sync? Like, comparing our type of a scenario, can we, next year probably, can we have some numbers like, oh, if we use bid sync and this is what we saved, basically, versus what we were doing in the past? So some comparative numbers would be good going down the line. And my next question was the delegation of contracts to the city manager you mentioned to the tune of, like, right now you mentioned $150,000.
That's what it currently is?
Currently is, right. So not to point out anything, but just from the process point of view, if we raise that limit to quite a high limit, as you mentioned, what can be the checks and balances for the system down the line? And I'm just trying to ask that question purely from perspective of checks and balances in the system, as we have checks and balances for the audit and other stuff. From the council point of view, what checks and balances we can look forward to that?
And the checks and balances will be defined. So with a purchasing program, that is the process. There's your check and balance. So the procurement office, contract manager working with the attorney's office, using standard templates, confidence that sound purchasing processes are being followed, meeting those 3 tenets, competition, equal treatment, so on and so forth. That's
I
Go
want
ahead,
to
Deanna.
add, I think that's a great idea that, of course, would come with increased delegated authority. There's checks and balances that are built into disclosures that are required through Form 700 as the first point to understand conflicts of interest. There's, of course, the procurement manager who maintains the integrity of the process and makes sure all the milestones are hit. There's also the city attorney's review that ensures that the issues are legal and that everything passes the sniff test. There's also the added feature that comes with delegated authority is that on a semi-annual or quarterly basis that we issue city manager delegated authority reports. It's a common practice in other organizations where you provide an inventory of awards of contract that were let under the delegated authority. You'll see one coming up on February 19th. And then the last is all of this is subject to audit. And we now have an auditor in place who is watching over us and reminds us that she is watching over us. And so there are lots of integrities that are available to the process.
And the other one I wanted to add was, unlike other cities I've seen, this city has an extremely detailed bills and claims report that goes to council, where it's not prior to the purchase, but it is after the purchase. You are in fact approving all the bills and all the payments made under these contracts. I can see room for improvement on those reports in terms of ensuring that there's work to be done, let's say, in terms of ensuring that the payments are consistent with the contracts, but at least the public is getting a report on the consent calendar of what the city is paying out on the contracts. And these are the kind of things where, as you improve your systems and you have transparency, there are cities that actually post all their contracts to the web, and through a web portal, anybody can look and see every contract that the city has. So, if we can move in that direction, if we can, work toward that effort, we can provide 100% transparency to the public about virtually all the city's business. I think that's a really good model to work towards. But as you can see, we have a lot of work to do. So, but I think if we could get to something like that, we'd go a long way towards having accountability right then and there.
Okay, very good. Are we good? If any other questions or comments?
I have one more comment.
Please, yes.
The city of Santa Clara uses a large number of contracts in order to acquire services and to move city staff work. And particularly our IT department has a contract out model where it's heavily reliant on consultant services to keep us sustained. We have been monitoring our federal policy on immigration, particularly with H-1B1 visas. And we have already had an incident where one of our key consultants charged with IT support for public safety has been deported and a visa not renewed. And so we are very actively trying to get our arms around this because it is an extension of service providers to us, and to the extent, and we know that the Silicon Valley is made up of high immigrants that have depended on H-1B1 visas, and to the extent that there's further impacts, it is a real threat to our ability to procure services as well as sustain services that are already in place. So I just want to put that because, again, it's a tier of resources and services that provide our workforce and make it more robust.
Good, excellent. Okay, we are now going to transition into the fiscal outlook, and in your packet and in the agenda, this is another recommendation that we will check in with you tomorrow afternoon. You will hear the budget principles, and so we'll ask you tomorrow afternoon to adopt the 2019-2020 budget principles and to also accept the 10-year financial forecast that you're going to hear in just a moment. And with that, then I'll turn it over to Angie Kretsch, and she'll walk us through this.
Good evening, Mayor, or it's good afternoon, I guess, Mayor and Council. Angie Kretsch, Director of Finance. It's always bad to do numbers after lunch when everybody's already tired. But of course, I find it exciting, and I'm sure like Lynn and Walter, we like numbers, but I understand. So if I see anybody nodding off, I won't say anything. So I want to start by giving a fiscal outlook. We have made significant progress with our 10-year fiscal plan. We've made some corrective forecast adjustments, and I'll go over those later in the presentation. You'll be seeing that those huge negatives that we had predicted in the last 2 years have went away. We're basically self-corrected a lot of them by changing our accounting, and we'll go over that. Pension costs still continue to rise. This is something that I've communicated to you the last 2 years. Property decreased due to the 49ers appeal. As you know from the news, the possessory interest tax that the 49ers won on the appeal, that is projected to decrease our property tax revenue about $600,000 annually in today's dollars. And then it will have a one-time impact of approximately $3 million this year. We still have the revenue that has a lot of tax volatility, and that's our sales tax and our transit occupancy tax, or TOT, and that makes up 31% of our general fund revenue. And then liabilities for our other post-employment benefits are OPEB, and we'll go over that a little bit later too. We also still have a lot of unfunded infrastructure needs and increasing demands for service. We need a strategic plan on revenue opportunities. This is something that we've talked about. Last year we talked about it with the council, and that's how we got the cannabis on the ballot, and it was passed. So that was one of our revenue options. The City Council has continued to build up reserves with one-time funds and continues to adopt strong budget principles. And so I'll show the chart later on the reserves, but you'll see that we have built up our budget stabilization reserve greatly this year. And there are predictable events that will adversely impact our fiscal outlook. I think that should be unpredictable. Economic slowdown, CalPERS reform actions, etc. So this may look familiar. This was last year. I presented this to you in June. You can see that the citywide annual operating budget is $860.9 million. And then we have it by category: general fund, special revenue, internal service funds, and enterprise funds. The general fund for 18-19 revenues were $250.5 million in the budget, and you can see that 55% of the general fund revenue, where the arrows are pointing, come from 3 revenue sources. So it makes up $137.8 million. So that is TOT, as I mentioned, property tax and sales tax, and as we mentioned, 2 of those, sales tax and TOT, are very volatile. So you can see right here, there's a breakdown. Sales tax makes up 23% of the general fund, and the trend is pretty flat. And property tax, stable. It's going up. Obviously, we've talked earlier about the price of housing, so that does impact our property tax revenue. Transit occupancy tax has remained flat also, and it makes 8% of our general fund revenue. General fund appropriations by type, and the reason I like to show this one is I like to show that 74% of our budget for the general fund is made up of salaries and benefits. So when you talk about cutting services or cutting, reducing the expenditures, it's really hard to do that without impacting services. So we want to show that. As I mentioned, sales tax is one of our volatile revenue sources. It's our second largest general fund revenue source. You can see here by our 10-year forecast that it's showing pretty flat. There's not huge increases here. It's very dependent on business-to-business sales, which is very dependent upon the economy. So if the economy goes down, then also these business-to-business transactions slow down. And with the TOT, it makes up our 3rd largest general fund revenue source. And the same thing, if there's an economic downturn, this could negatively be impacted. Rising pension costs. So we are managing 3 impacted categories, which are our retirees, our classic members, and the new employees, which are under PEPRA. We have changed our budget methodology, which decreased our forecasted PERS cost for the prior years, and that's what you'll see when we do the forecast, our 10-year forecast. CalPERS actions lowering the discount rate projected to have a significant cost impact. This is something I've spoken to you about over the last couple of years, going from the 7.5% to the 7% return rate over 3 years has negatively impacted the general fund, and not just the city of Santa Clara, but other cities are feeling this impact too. And then we did prepare a new 10-year financial plan using the city's actuarial, Bartell and Associates, who gave a presentation to the council a couple months ago. And these projected CalPERS rates were included in the framework for this plan. So with that, I want to show you that 64% of miscellaneous and 71% of safety accrued liability is due to retirees. So you can see the arrow there and see that even if we tried to do some cost sharing or anything like that, that it's really dependent. There's the biggest cost for PERS right now, our unfunded liability, is our retirees. So the current assets are not sufficient to cover the retirees portion. And then as I 63% of miscellaneous here, 63% of miscellaneous and 75% of safety hires in 18-19 were PEPRA. So that will help some because those PERS rates are lower for PEPRA employees. So we are predicting to increase our PERS, if you follow the 10 years, by $33.4 million for all funds. This includes enterprise funds by 29-30 when compared to 19-20 cost. The current unfunded accrued liability, or what we call the UAL, you may hear us saying that, is $516 million. And the way that we pay this $516 million is PERS actually charges us a fixed cost. So by 2029-30, our fixed unfunded liability cost will reach $31.7 million for miscellaneous and $32.2 million for safety. We are making good progress. We are putting money. We did open the a pension trust. I believe it was in 17-18, right when I got here, we opened it. And so we are putting money into that. It's not a lot of money, but I mean, we are making much more progress than others. We currently have $20.42 million in that account. And it makes up 4% of the UAL. So it's not a lot, but we're making progress. For the OPEB, or the other post-employment benefits, there is an unfunded accrued liability also in that. It's $28 million. We are currently at 31% funded, but we do have a funding strategy. So we are paying that over 22 years, so it will get paid off. We are paying the actuarial determined contribution, and recently, I know when we presented the CAFR, the Government Accounting Standards Board Statement 75, or GASB Statement 75, required that we start putting this on our financial statements. So you would have seen this amount as a liability on our financial statements. So this is a general fund reserves as of December 2018. So you can see where the what we call the BSR, Budget Stabilization Reserve. We have $63.3 billion. And then a capital projects reserve, we have 24.5. You can see on the side with the requirements, with the BSR, we have a 90-day or 25% of budgeted appropriations. And with the capital project reserve, we have a minimum of $5 million as our target. We also have the land sale reserve, which is revenue from the sale of our lands. We have $21.2 million in there. And then we also have the building inspection reserve, which is restricted. This is development fees restricted to fund the building division costs. So a total in general fund reserves of $118.6 million. And here's a slide to show you where we think we're going to be at the end of this year. And I want to call your attention to the first line, which is the general fund budget stabilization reserve. We are projecting that by the end of this year, we'll be at $78.3 million, which is really good and will help us in the times when if there were a recession or economic downturn, we will have some funds available. And I did want to say too, this is all one-time funds that we use to fund all of these buckets, I guess. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a lot of unfunded projects and infrastructure. We have, we don't have a capital fund strategy to address these short and long-term needs. We have public facilities and other infrastructure, streets and infrastructure, and parks and recreation needs. So under public facilities, you see that we need the Civic Center repair. We have the Corporation Yard, Fire Station, Convention Center, and Cemetery. I won't go on over all of these, but you can see that there are several needs under the streets and other infrastructure. And then the Parks and Rec, we still have the swim center and sports facilities that need to be updated. So now I'll go over the 10-year financial forecast that we've prepared. We prepared this using the CalPERS direction or methodology for payments and reflected accordingly in our budget practices. And this is what I'd mentioned earlier. We used the fixed costs now when we know what those fixed costs are based on Bartel, his actuarial report, so we've used those. We did put a modest economic slowdown in this plan, and we used revenue and expenditure. We reviewed all of those revenues and expenditures to make sure that they're updated. And we just recently completed the base budget review for 18-19, so that gives us a good jump-off point to know where we're at before we start with our our base for 19-20. So here we are at January 2019 with our net operating margin. This is a base scenario. So you can see there's not as much red as there was in the past, but it's still not, I would say it's more flat than anything, right? So the first year, which is 19-20, we are showing a small surplus of $1.1 million. But we're also showing some deficits in the next 3 years, and this is because of the recession or the slowdown that we had mentioned. We put a slight slowdown in there. The highest that we are projecting would be the $2.9 million in 27-28. So not great, but better than all the red that I've shown you in the past. So we wanted to give you just a snapshot if we did do a TOT ballot measure. So a 1% TOT ballot measure would solve the ongoing deficits. There are two years where it looks like it's a deficit, but they're so small we think that we could absorb those. And then we also, with a electric utility user tax ballot measure, could add, that's not included in here, but it could add an additional $2 to $4 million ongoing. So we were asked to do a deeper recession scenario, so worst case scenario. And so what we did was we looked at used our sales tax consultant who gave us the recession scenario, and the overall decline is 9.5% in fiscal year 2021 and 3.8% decline in 21-22. For TOT, again, it follows sales tax in a lot of ways. Property tax, we delayed and had a moderate effect due to the timing of the property assessments, and we assumed a lower interest rate during the recession. So you can see if we hit a recession, this is what it will look like in the next few years. It's not pretty, so. We were also asked, and I think this is one of the referrals that we'll be able to check off, if we went from 6.5% to 6% investment return, and this came from when John Bartel was giving his presentation. And so you can see that it's a little hard to see, but the solid red line is assumes the 6.5% return over a 10-year period. And then it's an increase of $58,000 in fiscal year 21-22 to up to $2.2 million in 29-30. And each year, and this I wanted to call, this is also just for the miscellaneous group. Each year's investment shortfall loss would be amortized over 20 years. So if there is a loss, that would be going out. So it's a total of $9 million increase if we went from 6.5 to 6%, with 5.3 of that being in the general fund. And this is safety, and safety is all in the general fund. So you can see that, I'll just go to the bottom, and you can see that the total for this one is $9.8 million over the 10-year forecast if we were going to go to that scenario. And this just shows you the miscellaneous and safety, how that grows. So, and this is also just for the general fund. It would be a total increase of $15.1 million over the 10-year plan. And then here we're just showing you the net operating margin using that same scenario, going from a 6.5 to a 6%. I like to use this just to kind of show you how, you know, we are not in an economic downturn, but you can see from the past that we have always went up and down. So you can see we're still going up. It is considered the second longest expansion in U.S. history, and currently on track to be the longest expansion. And then it's, you know, from current to 100, it's 116 plus months from June to today. So there are some potential impacts to our forecast. We have, as you know, maybe had read in the press that there is a possible decrease in stadium authority revenue to the city. We are in labor negotiations, and so those expenditures may be beyond our assumptions that we included in our plan. CalPERS actuarial changes or any CalPERS reform actions would impact us. The infrastructure operating budget impacts. We have projects in the CIP that once they're completed, they will have a operating impact, and so if those aren't vetted, those may not be included in here. The economy, as we said, if there's a slowdown. State and federal legislation changes, you know, further refinement of major tax revenue projections. I've been here 2 years. That's still not that long to see things through. Lynn's only been here for, 4 months? And then Ken Lee, who's helping with this, has only been here for about 4 months. So we're all still pretty new. And so we're still, as we learn more and more, we're able to refine these numbers. And then development projects, you know, like City Place, what are the revenue impacts? And then what are the staffing that's going to be impacted by that? So we just wanted to quickly go over the budget work plan for the current year. We are in, you know, as you may remember, last year you approved us going to a 2-year alternating budget development, and so last year we did the CIP. This year we're doing the 2-year operating budget. It's currently underway. We'll be updating the 2-year capital improvement plan next year, and then we'll also be making any updates in the 1920. When we bring the operating, we may have a memo telling you any new projects that or increases that are needed. The Stadium Authority operating debt service capital budget and marketing plan are scheduled for a study session for March 6th and then board action by March 19th. As you know, for our debt agreements, we have to have the budget approved by March 31st. So our overall budget approach is continuing to position the city for a potential economic slowdown through prudent management of reserves. Managing the project cost escalations by holding some projects for a more favorable bidding climate. Revenue projections will be reflective of historical trends, so we've looked at those and kind of tried to guess estimate based on what the historical trends are. And then managing changes in total compensation, specifically salary and pension costs. Potential new revenue sources, these are just some ideas that we'll probably be vetting more with you. Community benefit programs, review of our current taxes, including TOT and business license tax rates and methodology, development of new revenues such as the utility user tax I mentioned earlier, and other revenue opportunities. We are currently underway in a cost of services study, so we're reviewing all of our fees and charges for adjustment to full cost where appropriate. And we're also underway in a development impact fee study to consider potential new or modernization of our impact fees, which includes the art fee that I know that the council was interested in, so they're looking at that. So as I mentioned earlier, we adopted the 2-year CIP budget in the previous year, and so there will be adjustments. There may be adjustments to that in this year. We incorporated the city council priorities for fiscal alignment. Departments focused on approved projects in prior capital budgets, and the priority was given to address health and safety issues and serious deferred maintenance needs. And then long-term budget decisions were based on the data from the 10-year financial plan. You're going to see a new format. Ken's very excited. He's been doing what we call a road show, so he's been going to all the departments to show them the new format. It looks beautiful. So it will have a greater level of detail and increased transparency. You're going to see a lot of information that you probably haven't seen before, which I think is going to be great. The next bullet says, budget format has not changed since the 90s. We pulled up I think it was 93. We pulled a 93 budget, and our last year's budget was exactly the same. In fact, I think that one had a little bit more information, right, from 93. So we want to bring it up to the times. So budget will will include beginning and ending balances. This is something I've always wanted when I've been here. You almost feel like you're flying blind. It's like, what was the beginning general fund balance, and what are we projecting as the ending fund balance? So that's going to show, and it'll be a lot easier for the council to read and understand. Long-term fiscal decision-making, we're going to ask for departments to self-solve their budget request. We're going to continue our community engagement and transparency efforts, and a limited number of personnel and new vehicle requests will be considered. So we're also asking if you can improve your business processes, and this is questions that we're asking the departments. You may need to use one-time funds, but if it's going to save us money in the long run, we want you to bring those. We want the departments to bring those forward. And as the same as last year, we're no longer beginning with a status quo budget for the base year. Last year we tried it a little bit. This year we got even better. We really, I think, scrubbed the budget. It probably can be a little bit more, but we'll get better at that too as we all learn more about how the city works. Requests should not be made for items that cannot be requests should only be made for items that can be completed or be well underway. We don't want to approve things that they just want to put a placeholder for, and then they know they don't have the capacity. And as you've seen today, there's a lot of the workload's very huge. So we want to make sure you really have if you're asking for something, make sure you can do the work. Use of other funds before you use the general fund. If there's gas tax funds for streets, you go to that instead of general fund. That's what we're asking. And then, again, all budgets will be scrutinized regardless of the funding source. As I mentioned, we do have the Stadium Authority budget marketing plan. We're in the process of working on that now. It began in November of 2018. We are working with Stagco, Manco to receive all the required documents. I believe as of today we have them. We just have questions, but I'd have to check on that. Budget adoption is scheduled for March 2019, and here is the calendar or budget schedule. And for the city budget, we plan to come forward on April 9th with a study session as the council asked on the muni fee schedule, so we can talk about that. We'll have the consultant here, and they'll be able to go over a lot of the questions. On April 23rd, we're scheduled for a public hearing and adoption of the municipal fee schedule, and then May 7th, we have a study session to review the annual operating budget and the 10-year financial plan, and June 4th, we have a public hearing for the proposed annual operating budget, 10-year financial plan, and any adjustments to the CIP budget. We also kept a placeholder for June 25th if there's any questions or anything. Last year we didn't need to use it, but we wanted to make sure that we hold that in case the council wants us to bring it back for further discussion. And with that completes my part of the presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Angie. You make numbers come alive and lively and interesting.
I want to make them I just want to make them alive. I know that Angie was gracious in not giving finance credit as much as needed for the refinement in the budget. But if you look at the 5-year plan that the council had in 2017, it was double-digit million negative. And we have turned that around through looking at every ledger line item and questioning those assumptions as well as the funding levels. And it has saved dozens of jobs, dozens and dozens of jobs. And so I just want to put it into context so that we know how alive that refinement is.
Excellent, very good. And so now we open it up. Mayor Gilmore.
I just have just a clarification on the report, Angie. Thank you very much. And yeah, it looked a little bleak, a little bleak to say the least. And it's just getting better and better as our efficiencies are implemented here at City Hall and other things with all, the team here. But did your TOT projections include our new hotels that are planned?
Yes.
And also
I believe it include one new hotel.
just one new hotel, because City Place has, what, 2 or 3
Yeah.
new ones and 2 new ones and some other ones that are proposed. So I was curious about that. And then, did you include any type of revenue or reasonable revenue from the City Place development, the ground lease?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
I believe we pushed it out a year. I can't remember what year that, is it 2021? I'll let Ken.
2021.
2021, okay.
Okay. And I noticed it didn't include any potential utility tax. I mean, certainly that's subject to the voters and more discussion before we even go there, but I see that it didn't, but you did include additional TOT.
Correct.
If there were to be a tax. Okay, thank you. I just wanted those clarifications. Great work. Thank you.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Okay, I just had a kind of a minor question, but it was on slide 141. Angie, you said long-term fiscal decision-making, self-solve budget request, but I didn't really know what you meant by that.
So what we ask is, I'll give you an example. If someone wants a full-time position and they have part-time or as needed, or they have budget for as needed and they want a full-time, it's like we're asking, well, can you give up that as needed money to pay for that position so that it's self-solving, so that it's not an increase to the net budget, the bottom line.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Other comments, questions, reactions, City Manager?
So I just want to note that in your packet, under a tab, there's the budget principles for fiscal year 1920, and then their next tab should be the unfunded projects and infrastructure.
Okay, yeah.
Angie, if you want to comment on them, because for tomorrow, as part of the budget, as part of the action for this session, we will be asking the council to consider the budget principles, acknowledge the unfunded, but also provide direction to, for establishing the revenue, implement the revenue strategy with respect to TOT and further exploration of UUT. So we want to get that work more formalized so that we add that to the work plan.
Good. So do you want to say anything about that in terms of budget principles?
On the budget principles, I don't believe that we changed them much from what we've had. We just kind of brought them up to date to our current practices, so that they are pretty familiar to you. That's probably all I have to say on the principles. But again, like Deanna had mentioned, we want to move forward on some of these revenue opportunities, and that is one of the principles, right, for ongoing revenues.
Good. And when we come, and when we get to that point tomorrow afternoon, if you need a refresher, what were those budget principles before you make a formal adoption and approval? We can certainly go back to those. And then, as Deanna mentioned too, this is item number 5 on recommendations on giving the city manager direction on those 2 revenue strategies, the TOT tax and the utility tax, with the direction to give staff direction to come back with you for a work plan for those 2. So that lays out in front of us tomorrow. Councilmember Hardy?
Thank you. I had just a quick question on slides 131 and 132, where you were talking about the CalPERS and the investment return. You have a line called normal cost. Is that the cost? I wasn't quite certain what you meant by a normal cost. Is that the cost of the what?
So, very good question. So if you didn't have an unfunded liability, if we didn't have what we call the UAL, we would have a normal percentage cost that we would have to pay for PERS, no matter what, right? So that's what that number means.
Right. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. Other questions? Yes, Councilmember?
Thank you, Angie. You ran with the speed as if we are already in 21-22. Okay. Slide number 112, where we have general fund percentages.
There?
Yeah.
Yes.
So how we are comparing to other cities, surrounding similar nature of cities, how those numbers are comparing to other cities?
So I haven't really compared. I mean, I've got history from working, and I'm sure that several of the other employees here have history working for other cities. And the general, this is pretty common for the general fund because it's driven by property or tax funding sources, right? And so it pays for all of your public safety, your libraries, your city administration. So salary is always going to be higher in the general fund than any of the cities in government.
It is comparable with respect to the 74% mark. And in terms of the cities that I've been, we are a service-oriented organization, and our workforce is our biggest asset and investment, and it's reflected there in terms of the distribution of funds within the general fund.
Yeah. The only reason I'm asking this is because at California League of, they had a detailed session on budget surpluses and how to avoid fiscal meltdowns and other stuff. And I did pose that question to them. What is this salary percentage generally? So their number was a little bit lower than what ours is, basically, to be on a safer side, like 60s range or something like that, mid 60s or something like that. So that's why I'm asking, because 10% gap or something like that is pretty significant, and that's the reason I'm asking. If you do some comparative study between others, it would be nice to look at cities of the similar size, how we're doing on that.
And I will say, we didn't show it on here, but SVP Electric, when you look at their slide in comparison, we'll have that for the budget, there it's flipped. Salaries makes up maybe between 10 and 16%, I can't remember offhand, but their big expense is in their services and supplies because they have to purchase power. Right. So it just depends on what the makeup is.
Right.
Excellent. Good.
Coming back to slide number 128, I know we briefly discussed that. Other than TOT, what's on the table to beef up our revenue sources? Do you have some idea like what you're thinking of? Like we are just focusing on TOT.
We put together a whole revenue strategy and presented it to the city council. So before the budget is released, we'll recirculate the STEM revenue strategy.
Okay. And slide number 138, it mentions we want to put on hold on some of the projects. And do you know which projects are in pipeline which you're anticipating to put on hold on those?
So what we ask, was it 130? I'm sorry.
138. Yeah, there you go.
Is that it? Yeah. So this is what we ask departments to, so if you can to manage your project costs escalations by holding some projects. So if there is a downturn, some of these projects you're going to get a better cost for later in as we're looking forward, right? You know, it's just hard because you never know what the bidding climate is, and it's going to be helpful having Mark here now too, because he'll be able to tell us it's probably a good time to go out on a bid for this project, or the departments can actually go to them, because before they were doing it all themselves, right? And so they would just go out when the most expensive time, or for example, right now to build something is super expensive. Construction is, you can't hardly get development, right? Because it's just booming right now. So we're just asking the departments to think about that.
Okay, and the very next slide, I know I can hold that question because you are coming up with that detail on that, how potential revenue sources. I'll hold that question for now. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. Council, any other questions, comments, discussion points? Okay, so let's take a break. I've got 3:05. Are we okay with that? Yes. So I have 3:05, but we could reconvene at 3:15, and not that the schedule's the most dominant thing here, but that does get us right back on schedule if we could reconvene at 3:15. And the next up is your strategic pillars. So we'll do a quick update on those strategic pillars. And before we do that, I'll be asking you all for your top 1 or 2 accomplishments. We'll kick off the next segment with that so you can think about that. Yeah, organizational accomplishments, what you see as the 1 or 2 top organizational accomplishments over the last year. council strategic pillars, and we'll have a presentation on those and do an update on each one of those. And then again, referring back to your packet in the public agenda, staff will be looking for your approval on 2 items related to the strategic pillars. One is you're going to hear a new potential pillar on sustainability, and so that would be in addition to the ones you already have. And then there is another pillar on staffing, and that's pretty much what the pillar says, and staff is recommending that that become broader on workforce issues. And so that will be explained as we move through the pillars. And again, we'll look for you to approve this tomorrow if that's your desire to do so. And Deanna, you're going to lead this segment off? Okay.
And we already have process improvement. We now have a pointer on the screen, and it shows on all screens. So that shows how quickly our staff responds. Thank you, our IT team. So these are the policy priorities that the council has been carrying for quite some time. And what we have been doing behind the scenes is looking at our investments in them. And so as part of the budget process, we'll ultimately achieve in the out years your level of investment for each of them. And then if we get really good, we'll talk about staffing and things of that sort. Already it's been mentioned that I wanted to look at some of our policy priorities just to test as to whether they're still relevant. Particularly, I believe they all are. I do think that our maintain adequate staffing levels needs to be amended so that it speaks more to than just the number of people, but the quality of resources, the issues of workforce capacity. And so I've recommended that we look at that as a pillar that is reflective of manage strategically our workforce capacity and resources. So it's not just about numbers. The other will receive a separate presentation from Manuel and Craig on sustainability, where we show the efforts already underway and introducing it as a pillar so that we begin to make some advancements in that area. Much of this has already been shared through my one-year report out to the community in my letter of the accomplishments that we have achieved over the past year. I want to make some special comments on areas of focus over the near term and certainly throughout the fiscal year. We talked earlier today about City Place and the need to resource that appropriately and on a shorter timeline than desired, although we'll get started on that very quickly. Under the promote and enhance economic and housing development, last year I talked about the absence of a real estate function acknowledging our large portfolio. In the budget process, we were not able to find resources of how we could solve for the problem, given the other areas of service that we were solving for. I do want to bring forward a proposal this year as part of the budget process so that we once and for all remedy that gap and start to work towards correcting our real estate portfolio management. We're moving on all of these issues as you see them, the downtown precise plan and convening with the community and receiving input. We are supporting Santa Clara Square. It looks great. If you haven't been out there, take a look. Really very charming project. We're also working on the affordable housing policy as well as production. And one area that I want to begin to probe into a little bit more is item number 5, our business relations, and particularly supporting our small businesses and understanding what resource needs they may have. I can tell you by experience from in other cities, those cities that had economic development functions provided some sort of access to small business training and addressing with them a forum for our small businesses to get together and learn collectively on areas that are important for our small business community to be strong and viable. We already have accomplished our compliance with prevailing wage law. This is a great example of what happens during the absence of an internal intergovernmental function where the law had passed and we just didn't have a resource that was able to implement the law. We're now successfully managing our compliance there. On Tuesday, we've talked about you'll receive a recommendation for the convention center operations and as well as a transition plan. And we're working on just moving forward on areas of the Valley Fair expansion and their city place again. I do want to mention that this is a missed opportunity. We've been trying to work with NOVA. That's our Northern County program for our workforce investment at compliance. It is, I think, an area that we need to, it's housed out of Sunnyvale. It is a department for the city of Sunnyvale. We are a paying partner, and we really need to leverage that service so that we can bring those resources into Santa Clara in a far greater extent. All right, so that pretty much with the items that I've covered there, recognize what accomplishments have been achieved and the areas that we're still advancing. And through the department reports, you'll also get more granular level understanding of each. On enhanced community sports and recreation assets, we celebrated several grand openings. I just thought it was absolutely a sign of Santa Clara and its vibrancy. For one weekend, we were opening the San Tomas Monroe Neighborhood Park. The next weekend, the next week we were groundbreaking for Reed and Grant Sports Park. And in between all of this, we were able to open up an interim dog park. And so it just really shows that our connection with the community and providing the services that are needed. We've had fantastic success with our bookmobile implementation. It's just a cool, innovative way of providing and connecting with our community. And while our first attempt at applying for an all-inclusive park grant was not successful, we turned that around, submitted a second application, worked with the county, and it ended up getting $800,000 more. And so now we have a $1.8 million allocation. But during that conversation, we were able to work with the county so that the school also received a small portion of our allocation that was carved out for the city. So now we'll benefit for having two parks, all-inclusive parks within Santa Clara. So we turned something that was unfortunate into a real super opportunity. We have several master plans underway. They're all there, Bowers, Machado, Home Ridge, and Montague Park. We will be bringing back our work for the park fee review and update. If you recall, we delayed it to do a little bit more engagement. And we continue to advance the Central Park Master Plan. For delivering and enhancing high-quality, efficient services and infrastructure, I really like the top item. This is where Gaurav and I find a lot of alignment with vision and looking at at Santa Clara as a smart city and leveraging our assets through some of our developments, Silicon Valley Power, and just starting to think more creatively of how we can bring some smart city elements at a higher level. We have the key document that we completed last year, which is an inventory and assessment of our facility conditions. You saw that it was simple to read. It had red, yellow, and green in terms of overall assessment, and we did a walkthrough. So you now have that as a working document, and we can bring that back as part of the budget process. Multimodal improvements, lots of studies underway. We have made some progress on our IT project pipeline, particularly our CAD implementation. I've mentioned before, and it will come up again tomorrow, we are tracking 34 projects that are either being implemented or completely replaced. And earlier today, I talked about, in some cases, we have the software in-house already. It's been procured. We just don't have the capacity to turn the corner and get it implemented. We'll also talk about tomorrow as part of our IT project pipeline. We've brought up the framework today of how to look at our resources as through people, process, and programs, I think. And we need to look at that through the IT lens. And so Gaurav is prepared to lead that discussion, particularly in the people category and its impact to successful deployment. You received a large presentation today on our citywide purchasing policies, our surplus properties approach, as well as our contract management. We did achieve the coal and carbon-free electricity in late 2017, and we are continuing to advance our contract compliance, risk management, and oversight of contracted services. Some of these I've already mentioned. We've talked about cannabis policy. You've seen before you the massage parlor ordinance, our tobacco ordinance. We have an audit program in place now. We are managing our capital projects, but more than that, we are looking at implementing an automated tracking system so that everyone in-house has real-time access to understanding the current state of our capital projects management. Right now, it's a paper manual process. In other cities, there is an online system where you can move things along through an integrated project management system, and it helps with more orderly management, which increases cost efficiency, but it also allows for us to know how things are moving and where the slowdowns are. We've been responding, as you received this week, for our one-year report on our settlement agreements to regional development projects, and we continue to track those in-house, as well as we're looking at a traffic fee impact update, and we're complying with our minimum wage and worker retention policy. This is where the pillar is referred to as maintain adequate staffing levels. I think we've learned today that it's a more holistic approach for which we need to look at this pillar, and that there is some strategy that we need to put into place so that we continue to strengthen this pillar, which from there all things flow with respect to service. We've talked about our budget due diligence and how it has saved dozens of positions. We're estimating between 40 to 50 is the value of going from 8.5 last year deficit to 1 million. We certainly have put in place organization development efforts. We're training on a quarterly basis with our management staff. Today, Teresa talked about the Civic Scholars Program. We announced that at our employees' picnic. It had really high interest, and we're launching it next week with 2 briefings for our staff. Another way to bring to them easy ways for skill building and access to higher education. We've hired key vacancies. It is something that we continue to have to work on. Just sometimes when I think we've caught up with our vacancies, new ones occur. We've mentioned already earlier today, as I said, I wanted to do the wave in the room when Vice Mayor Mahan brought the Civic Center master plan up. I do think it's something that we need to add to the work plan and work diligently over the years to see what we can accomplish. And I believe we've maintained good labor relations and have negotiated the contracts in short order. Within a couple months of tenure here, we were able to accomplish 5 MOUs, and we're off to the tables with the other 5. For enhancing community engagement and transparency, by week 1 here, I issued a city manager blog. Maybe it was week 2, but certainly we've stayed in practice of pushing out information to the community through social media, as well as through a blog report. We have expanded our online reach. We are, through the dark money ordinance, we have promoted transparency in funding local campaigns and source of funds. We have greater use of peak democracy through the statistics that you've seen today, as well as we've engaged in some real data for baseline information to understand where we're at from a service delivery standpoint, which in large part was from a council referral that was focused on the Stadium Authority, and that from there we were able to get some good baseline data. I'm in practice of working with the departments to issue information memos. They don't need action from the council, but they're good areas to report out on. You'll be receiving some more over the next couple of weeks on real important topics. And I liked the refreshed approach that allowed for city staff to get out with the mayor in the community and engage at the community level for state of the city. And I thought that was a way to look at improved community engagement for city staff. We continue our programs for Leadership Santa Clara, Neighborhood Watch, and our boards and commissions. We talked about the relaunch of My Santa Clara, an area that we can continue to build on and provide expanded support for our community. And the 10-year fiscal outlook is an incredible accomplishment for us to have a longer-term view when making decisions today. For ensuring compliance with Measure J and managing the Levi Stadium, we did complete a high number of the we are we completed comprehensive audit status monitoring. We're in a good routine now where we're tracking the audit recommendations. We are reporting out to the ad hoc committee our level of completion. I'm hearing something. Oh, I thought I heard something in the background. It's Mark. Through last year's budget process, we have a set aside of $630,000 for the community room. We will be bringing forward a community room discussion after the budget process for the board to deliberate on next steps. We were successful in transferring to a new concessionaires agreement and working in partnership with Manco. And you obviously, if you've been to the Levi Stadium, can see the product of new food products and a new concessionaire. We have real-time noise monitoring program in place, and believe it or not, our media is tuned into it. And with the National Football Championship, as we were fielding media calls, they were online telling us how cool it was to watch the noise monitoring through the process. We have a telephone number that's been established to receive input from residents. We obviously concluded a robust community engagement. I talked earlier about what's the next step. We understand that we have some fragmented department deployment, and bringing that all together to better serve neighborhoods is also a continued part of the strategy that builds from the data that we collected. And we had a successful event from a public service standpoint of supporting the event, the College Football Playoff National Championship event, particularly through protecting the city and the stadium authority from huge multi-million-dollar losses. That alone was a huge accomplishment. Next steps on the college football is once we get through the budget process, we then need to begin to put together an audit work plan. There were some strong audit clauses in that agreement, and we'll want to work to make sure that we begin to understand the time frame for conducting that audit. As well as on Measure J, we now have the independent auditor function. She's actively engaged in reviewing our work. We have a separate audit that we talked about at the ad hoc committee a couple of times where we're looking at the past non-NFL events against the general ledger, and we hope to bring that work forward over the next months. We've improved budget transparency. In this area here, I did note earlier, we're on a critical path for understanding the draft budget submittals, particularly related to the revenue projections that were included from Manco of an 85% drop in revenue. We are going back and forth and asking questions, and we'll be really diligent over the next 4 weeks to really understand those numbers as they impact the board. Marketing plan, we completed a revamp of the marketing plan last year. The board had charged us to work with Manco, and we had agreement to put in place key performance indicators within the first 90 days. We were not successful in completing those KPIs within 90 days, and we're still looking to complete those KPIs so that at some point we have data metrics, much like what you've seen today, that help us with informing our decisions, particularly related to non-NFL events. I do want to mention, though, that while we weren't on target for the KPIs, we completed some significant work through the ad hoc committee that stems from the Measure J audit, in that we brought forward the average value of non-NFL events per year. And that is significant data to understand the value when a non-NFL event is held for revenue, because it lets you know where we're trending, and we know where the money-losing events are, and we know where the gains are at. And so this is just very good quality data to make informed decisions going forward. So we did have an opportunity to work with NYU we were selected, we applied, and we were selected. This is one of the areas where the mayor led through the U.S. Conference of Mayors of securing some resources that allowed for us to go into deeper studies of areas that were impacted by community engagement, or studies that were informed with community engagement as well as financial analysis. They've completed their work, and we're waiting for their final school product. And so when we get it, we will share that with the board. And we're also engaging in enforcing our agreements. There are areas within our agreements where the board has not necessarily implemented its oversight function in a more complete and thorough manner, and we've been able to share correspondence with the board on our efforts to seek a better balance. I do want to mention that in this category, the relationship between putting the budget together and general fund contributions from non-NFL events, as well as the decision on the possessory interest tax, have an impact on our 10-year outlook. And so we're going to work as part of, as we put together our draft budget proposal on the city side, to make sure that we provide the scenario of less revenue from non-NFL events and its impact to the general fund, as well as the impact from the decision on possessory interest tax. So that's still work very much underway, and the 10-year projections that you received today will be revised once again. I'm going to hand this off to Manuel and to Craig. This is one of the pillars that I think we should carry. One, because there has been a council appropriation of roughly about $200,000 to update the climate action plan. And it's an example of some of the discussions that we had today, where very good efforts on the policy side to put something together, but no resources within the organization to actually deploy it. I did want to mention that as another example, the city has, through Silicon Valley Power, a public benefits program. The balance in the public benefits program is roughly $12 million, and funds in that program can be used for energy efficiency ideas, renewable power concepts, research and development, low-income programs. And what's occurred with that fund is we don't have a project manager or a program manager to oversee that, and so we've not been able to deliver those valuable services, particularly in research and development, that allow for us to advance our climate action plan. I will be bringing forward a proposal to put a program manager in place to begin to look at the public benefits program and further support our climate action plan efforts. So from here, Manuel?
And before Manuel gets started, let me just do a quick process check here. So following Manuel and Craig's presentation on this potential new strategic pillar, we'll go immediately to public comment, public presentation. There's a 3:45 time certain, so we want to respect the public for doing that. Then we will reconvene and go to council on accomplishments and discussion of the pillars themselves. Manuel.
Thank you. Oops, going backwards as we change clickers. Pleasure to be here today to talk about sustainability. And while we know we have to keep ramping up, there are some current efforts that the city's taking on for sustainability within the city. One of them, we talked earlier about aging city buildings, and one of the things we do as we look at creating space and modifying space to make it more available, and we'll talk about that a little more tomorrow, is that we did take those opportunities when we're redoing facilities to upgrade those facilities and use more efficient materials, efficient lighting, so on and so on. So it's not, it's a as-you-go part of it. It's not a whole master process, but we are doing it on a case-by-case basis. From a waste reduction perspective, I think we have spoken to the council a few times about organics collection. Is something that we're going to have to address as we continue to move forward. It's a difficult one for the city and the residents, but something that does provide sustainability benefits. You've seen many of our projects as it relates to development. There's significant requirements as it relates to TDM, what those TDM requirements will be, what type of reductions you'll have to do. And as part of Silicon Valley Power, we do have some pretty exciting energy efficiency programs, solar incentive programs, and green power programs. As you know, we have Santa Clara Green Power that allows for 100% renewable energy that you can sign up for. Even if you don't do that and you're a resident and it's residential, we have 100% carbon-free power that we provide for you. We do have some electric incentives in our neighborhood solar program. Even though it's coming to an end, it was very successful, and we were able to provide a lot of solar panels for schools and nonprofits. One that's not in there, and I do want to say it today because I just got an email about 2 hours ago that it's a little earlier than we thought, is our charger rebate program. It's now live.
So it went live. We're going to have a big push on that in February, and that provides rebates for single-family homes, multifamily homes, as well as schools and nonprofits to be able to get chargers installed and get a rebate from SVP. So it's a brand new one, just posted today, and we'll have our big push on that to let everybody know about it over the next month. So with that, I'll pass it over to Craig.
Thank you, Manuel. The Department of Public Works is involved in several initiatives related around sustainability. And so typically, why do people push towards sustainable products or initiatives? One, sometimes that's market driven. Through construction, you see that recycled materials can be cheaper, so sometimes that drives it. The second part is maybe that's the right thing to do, and that's what staff wants to do and thinks best for the city, so we can move towards sustainability that way. And then the third way is initiatives or any permit requirements in which we're forced to do it. So I'm going to go through the next 3 slides on some of the initiatives from Public Works. The first one being the Courtyard Green Business Certification. So this is a staff-driven initiative. Department staff in the Courtyard learned of this program through the county, thought it was the right thing to do, knew that they could get it done within their existing resources and with an existing budget. So they started on that effort to pursue it. And so we're looking to try and obtain that this summer. But what it consists of is implementing a variety of things around the courtyard. One of them is to implement an environmentally preferable purchasing policy, so we'll be working with Mark on that. But it looks at buying materials, products that are free of chemicals, that are sustainable, looks at aerosols, light bulbs, things of that nature. Looks at reduction. How can we reduce water use? So not only through education, but also installing things like sink faucet aerators to help reduce the water usage. And then lastly, it looks at how can you deal with your waste in a sustainable manner. So how do you properly sort it? How do you properly dispose of it, whether it's recyclables, garbage, batteries, paints, chemicals, things of that nature. So we're really excited about that effort, and again, trying to get that accomplished through the county this summer. So the next item that we're moving forward with is a green fleet policy. So we're in the process of developing that. And so the city has a great fleet manager, Chris Fozzi, who's been around for several years, and he's done a huge effort to get a lot of data. We talk about being data driven. So over the past few years, he's tracked a lot of information, set up databases, spreadsheets, so we have a lot of good information. Setting up a green fleet policy really based on 2 key things. One is there opportunity to reduce our fleet? Obviously, reducing our fleet reduces emissions, reduces costs. So how do you go about doing that? Well, in analyzing the data, looking at vehicles that maybe don't have a lot of miles on them, can we set up programs where we share vehicles? Can we get rid of vehicles that we don't need? So we'll be looking at that. And the other is looking at how we green our fleet. So we do have different vehicles, electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles. We're going to be looking more at that. But really, the key need is to set up a policy around that. Obviously, greening the fleet sometimes could mean that vehicle might be a little more expensive. So we want to set up a policy that will set some guidelines to allow staff to move ahead and make those purchases and fall within the guidelines so we get environmentally friendly vehicles. The other thing that we're looking at doing through the budget process is allocating money to get some consultant support. And what we really want to do is start looking at our internal processes, the city manager directives related to fleet, to start setting up policies about when vehicles are underutilized or how we procure those vehicles. I think that's going to be a huge asset to this next step of greening the fleet. And we're looking at this policy approval in 2019. The other thing we're looking at is technology. So with all that data we have, there's a lot of new technology out there, how you can monitor vehicles, how you can monitor idling times. So we're going to be looking into that as part of this consultant effort that we're going to be going forth to request funds this budget cycle. So another item that's come up, so this falls under the category of things that being mandated upon us. So we're required to adopt the next phase of the Green Infrastructure Plan. And so this is through our municipal regional permit, and this is needs to be adopted by the fall of 2019. And really what this does is develop guidelines for streetscape and project design and construction. So the key is to look at retrofitting existing spaces that are impervious with the goal of getting rainwater, storm drainage to infiltrate into the ground. Then there's also drainage set up so if you're in an intense period, that excess water can go into the drain system. But usually that'll happen during the less intensive periods of the rainfall, and so it won't inundate creeks. So that's a big component of it. Also treating that stormwater, so whether it's through biofiltration or other filtration methods, these infrastructure plan is going to address that. And then lastly, it's going to look at projects and determine a mechanism to prioritize multi-benefit projects. So projects that include stormwater treatment, complete street aspects, as well as urban forestry. So this plan is going to include specs and details, and it's ultimately setting up the framework for what we feel will probably be the next edition of the municipal regional permit, in which we're start being forced to roll out certain aspects of this plan.
Additional efforts that will be occurring, of course.
Do you want to finish up, Manuel, and then we'll go directly to public comment?
I'll go quick.
Yeah.
We'll be updating the climate action plan. Deanna mentioned that's a funded project, and we're looking, CDD will be the lead on that project, and we're looking at the second half of this calendar year to get that going. Of course, the green building codes that have been implemented, adopted. And lastly, of course, we have a general plan sustainability policies that we follow. We do know that those can always be beefed up, and the plan is when we do update the general plan, we'll take a hard look at that. On the last slide, to finish it off, we do have some new initiatives as well. We're looking at transitioning to bleach-free paper towels. Definitely reduce the use of plastics, and by looking at this meeting, I think this side of the table wants to be more like your side of the table with the use of single reusable drinking cups. There you go. So I'm glad the council did a great job on that. We want to increase the amount of recyclable materials, and I think Deanna brought up the new capital projects database, and that's one of those elements where you can really take care of two things at one time. It really gets us where we need to be from a capital project management, but also a lot of the things we do with paper right now, like change orders and like transmittals and submittals, which is all paper-driven from one place to the next, becomes all electronic, including approvals, reviews, so on and so on. So it shows how you can take one thing and really combine it and meet two goals that the city has. And of course, we're looking at a sustainable procurement policy as well as part of this process and new initiatives. And that concludes the presentation.
Very good. Excellent, thank you. So council will hold on their questions around the sustainability and any of the other pillars, and we'll move to public comment at this time. So members of the public, and I'll let the mayor manage this part of the meeting.
Assistant City Clerk, do we have any cards? I don't see any on here. So if any member of the public would like to come forward, the microphones, it's open mic. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I see that one of the council priorities from last time is to enhance community engagement. To me, that means helping residents to get more involved. I'm the Vice President of the Old Quad Residents Association. I'm also a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, the CAC. We've had a heck of a time recently in finding affordable meeting rooms in the city. Okra recently wanted to have our general meeting at the Senior Center. The municipal fee schedule says that the rooms are $18 per meeting for nonprofits. When I went to book the room, I was told that we would be charged an additional $32 per hour for 3 hours. The staffing charges for room setup and tear down and for someone to be there. That means the meeting went from $18 to $114. Nowhere in the municipal fee schedule does it say that. We would be happy to set up the room ourselves. We ended up booking Maywood Park, which cost us only $25 total for the meeting. But I can't book parks rooms at the Senior Center. I had to go to the CRC. Makes no sense that I can't book all the city's rooms at either the Senior Center or the CRC. So I made first I made one trip to the senior center, then another trip to the CRC to reserve. Now I'll have to go back to the CRC during office hours before our meeting on February 16th to get the key for the room, and then I'll have to go back after the meeting to return the key. That means 3 trips during office hours in addition to our actual meeting. If I wanted to use one of the larger meeting rooms at our libraries, according to the municipal fee schedule, I would be charged $50 an hour with a 2-hour minimum, plus a $50 room rental and processing fee, a total of $150 minimum. No break for nonprofits. Community groups like meeting at the libraries because the libraries are open until 9 p.m. Finally, if I wanted to rent a room at the CRC, it would cost Okra $47 per hour, and there's no break for nonprofits. So my asks are the following. Allow residents to see room availability online. Allow room reservation at both the CRC and the senior center, or better yet, online. Standardize room rental rates across all city facilities, senior center, libraries, CRC, and parks buildings. Switch to electronic locks at parks buildings and install security cameras to prevent damage. Rather than insisting that the 49ers build a difficult-to-access community meeting room at a cost of $630,000, they should be asked to subsidize cost recovery rentals at existing public buildings for nonprofits. Finally, come up with a plan to coordinate meeting room rentals at private facilities like the new Summerhill Senior Apartment Complex, Lawrence Station, and Agri-Hood. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public, please come forward.
Hi.
Welcome.
Have you been in this room all day? Yeah. And have you had your minds pulled 18 different ways by so many topics that you're ready to die? It looks like it. My name is Mark Richardson. I'm a school board trustee for Santa Clara Unified. Thank you for letting me speak today. I see your giant clocks. I'm not here to advocate for myself. I understand today is goal setting, and it looks like it's reviewing and then setting new goals or attempting to set new goals for next year. What I would suggest to you is that you, amongst yourselves, decide if you're interested in a goal that surrounds children, the children of Santa Clara. And I don't mean all kids. For those of us like me who have school-age kids and a few of you that I know, our kids are going to be fine. Our kids have support. They have great teachers, and they're going to be fine. But for 25 years, I've worked with at-risk kids. The gang members, the drug addicts, the homeless, the molestation victims, and their lives have gotten much harder, as you've heard me say before, in the last 2 years. Your goals that you come up with may be horribly dry and uninteresting. They may be thrilling to others. Trying to get consensus from groups is difficult, I know in my own little universe. But what most of us can agree on is that the kids I'm talking about really need help. I would love to partner with you. My entire board, and I'm not speaking for them today, I'm speaking for myself. My entire board will say they all want to work with you, and most of them do. I will tell you that. But whether it be a homeless shelter, whether it be a job sharing a job program, a mentoring program for these kids, I would love to work with you on that. And maybe the goal for this coming year is just to put together the idea. What is it we want to accomplish? I'm not here to ask for money. I'm here to ask for something much more precious, and that is your time and your interest. Because when you meet these kids, you can't help but want to help. I wanted to bring Eduardo today. A few of you met Eduardo a few weeks ago. Young guy, well-spoken when I get him off the F word. He's full of anger. I couldn't bring him today because he was jumped and beaten with brass knuckles, and he's home trying to get better. So I want to help the Eduardos. So if you're interested, you know where to find us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for bringing that. It's very important. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Thank you. Welcome, Kurt.
Afternoon. That's really eye-opening, sad. I'd like to just make a comment compared to last year to this year. and I mentioned this to the facilitator, so I just wanted to be transparent about what I shared, that last year you had the opportunity for the public to comment after each major section, so that if there were comments on any one particular area, you could kind of address them as they come. This year, it was 2 public comments. I think you had 2 or 3 last year, which was amazing to get that much public input. But you also had those opportunities after each major section. So now, if there's a comment on each one of those, it's going to be kind of disjointed and kind of rapid. And so maybe for tomorrow, if you consider that as something to look at. One of those things is the cannabis policy. It was supposed to happen, from my understanding, something was supposed to happen in 2018, and to hear that it might be at risk, that it might not even be done because the revenue isn't really there, I think that's pretty disturbing and unacceptable response to something that was voted, I think, over 60–70% in this city to embrace as something to do in this city. So I hope that's not an option on the table, that it just gets dismissed because the revenue opportunity has now gotten smaller. So I just that's really important to not just dismiss that. And lastly, I really appreciated hearing the sustainability pillar, and I hope that I can offer an idea of expansion on what that sustainability pillar incorporates, not just the environmental pieces, which it does, I think, a really great job on, but also the community and small business and quality of life elements for sustainability of the city. Because the city is losing the very things that make it special, the small businesses, that culture, and that small town feel, and the businesses that have been here for so long are at risk. And so, again, this is another example how I feel, and I won't be here tomorrow, so I'm going to mention it one last time, that I really hope that the idea of understanding what the worker cooperative model is and why I think it's an important element in this city and how it can be embraced here, and how I think it can help this city get options for small business owners that do want to retire or get out of the workforce and still preserve the culture and the legacy of their business. I think it's a way to do that. And as a potential thing, I heard the benefits for employees. Can we get housing and things like that? What about some kind of ordinance in the future for employee-owned businesses to have same kind of affordability opportunities because they're members, solid members of this community? Something of a long-term goal, kind of like senior housing or special categories, create a new category for worker owners. So thank you very much.
And thank you for the comments on the public presentation. We'll look at day 2 to make sure we have enough opportunities for the public. Thank you. Any other public members? All right.
Okay, very good. So as we start, I'm looking at the hour here, and we'll start moving towards wrap-up, actually. But let's do 4 things here. First off, let's open up the floor to council. Any questions to staff about the strategic priorities, pillars you've heard, the expansion, enlarging the scope of the staffing, the potential new sustainability pillar? Any questions to staff around that? Second, let's move towards accomplishments, to hear your top 2 organizational accomplishments over the past year. I will then do a very quick recap, really just highlighting the topics that we talked about, and then back to council to have any questions, topics about anything that happened today, anything you want to follow up on in terms of discussion. So, item number 1, questions, comments, reactions to the strategic priorities and pillars. Councilmember Davis.
Manuel, so you announced that we're going to have the rebate program for people for the charging thing. So how are we rolling that out? There's a lot of people in my neighborhood that plug their cars in at night, and they've been having problems where people come along and take them out, like vandalism. So is this charging within their house, or how can we help these people that might have them, and how can we help the people that need them?
Yes. So this is a rebate program, and just say we went live a little earlier than we expected, so that's good. But we're going to be, now that we're live and just see how everything's coming together, we're going to have our whole outreach and push for it over the next month with an outreach program to make sure everybody knows about it. We have 3 different rebates. We have a single-family home rebate, that's $750. Then we have a multifamily home rebate, that's $3,000. And then we have a school and nonprofit rebate, that's $5,000. And, there's different guidelines for each one that you have to follow. So this is really related to helping people install new chargers.
Right.
It's not necessarily for, if somebody has vandalism or anything else like that. But, we, as part of it, I can talk to staff and see if there's any, as part of the rebate program, if there's any additional information we can provide about location, where to put them, how people might be able to kind of place them in better places to avoid some of the issues that are happening. So we can check into that.
Okay, and the other thing was, is this going to be in conjunction with SVP and regular general fund monies, or how? Because some of this stuff looks like Larry Owens, but, he's gone. So I'm just wondering, how is this?
This is part of the public benefits program, so it's
Okay,
funding
all right.
that can only be used for this purpose.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Good. Council, other questions, comments, and response? Councilmember O'Neill.
So I've been raising some issues about sustainability since I was on the Planning Commission. So I'm very supportive of that. I think it's something we have to do. Everyone, I say that, at whatever body I go to about the existential threat that climate change is for us all. So I'm supportive of that. I know everything is, we're very strapped, but I think that this is something where we have to demonstrate that whether it's from the polar vortex to, fires in California, that there's a lot of stuff going on, and we have to change the way that we live and the way that we operate, from city level to the transportation system to the electric grid, all of that. So I think that's really should be a high priority. And I'm hoping, I know that we've got so many issues, and for so long Santa Clara has been understaffed, and the staff has heard me talk about that, and other people have heard me talk about it. So I know we've got to figure out how do we balance all this, and we do have to continue to set priorities, but I'm in supportive of fleshing out this idea. And then tomorrow I can talk about some ideas I have for some things where we might tweak a couple of the other areas.
Excellent, very good, great. Others, yes.
Councilmember O'Neill kind of alluded to it, but I'm new to this process. I want to make certain I understand when it is we can raise issues, because today was mostly information.
Mm-hmm.
But will there be time, because it looks like a lot of this is done out already?
Mm-hmm. And there'll be an opportunity tomorrow to raise issues. If you want to now, we would love to hear. If you want to share those now, we'd be happy to hear those and receive those.
Well, there are things I've been hammering on for a while. Suds Jang mentioned that I've been very concerned about the cost for the community rooms and the process being so onerous for our residents that I don't feel that those are being used. I'm not really happy with some of the choices that were made for the garbage program, and I happen to be the one person around here on the pilot program, and I have some very specific concerns about it. And I really want to get that bike trail open, and I've been doing some research on that over by the stadium.
Okay, very good, thank you. And then staff is taking notes, and we will convene on how we might integrate that in tomorrow. Thank you. Other comments? Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment regarding the sustainability program. I'm really excited to see the city taking on this step, because one of the committees I serve on is the Recycling and Waste Committee. And there was a program last summer honoring all the green businesses in the area, that have been, achieved a certain level and also maintained that level of sustainability and green efforts over the last 3 years. I think you have to get recertified every 3 years. And I think there were 4 or 5 cities around us that received awards that night, and Santa Clara was not one of them. And so I'm really glad to see the city going forward with this, and that hopefully the next time they have awards, Santa Clara will be one of those cities. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Good, excellent. Other comments? Mayor Gilmore?
I was just going to say, I have a lot of ideas for tomorrow. I'll save them for tomorrow. But just,
okay.
I had some ideas about the use of community rooms and trying to streamline a process, make it easier and cheaper for groups to use. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But also, when we talk about the stadium, neighborhood protection is a huge item that I want to talk about
Okay.
tomorrow, and how we beef up those efforts for neighborhood protection, because we're just not getting it
Right.
done right now.
Okay.
So, among other things,
Yeah.
I'll talk about that tomorrow.
Very good. Neighborhood protection as well? Yeah, location around the stadium. Excellent.
Right.
Councilmember?
Okay. I will concur about the sustainability. That's a big thing, and we have a good expert sitting over here, Mr. Jain. He can be a great help for that. And it's a high time that we look into on really top priority to make sure something happens on that. And you mentioned $12 million is sitting over there for sustainability management. That's a good thing. Hopefully we can do that.
Excellent.
Some of the other issues I will just point out, and we can discuss those later on. Affordable housing, and it has been one of the most demanding issue for the community. And as Mr. Kirkwarten said, we can explore out of the box, like affordability housing for self-employed, like cooperative people, other than the seniors and other stuff. So we need to look at those, like not only building housing, but how we make it affordable housing. And one other thing two other things which you are not mentioning over here is the rents for the working families. It is very exorbitant if they don't have affordable housing, and it comes to the same component, but specifically what we can do about that, if city can participate in some way or the other, and the traffic management. And one idea, I can throw it on the table right now, and we can discuss tomorrow or priority-wise, like the employee tax. A lot of our neighboring cities has come up with our license fee revenue is very low, and we need to seriously look into our corporations like NVIDIA, Intel, like I discussed that thing. They are multi-billion-dollar organizations, and they can afford few $1 million a year for these, alleviate these problems for our community where they get the best of the services. So we need to seriously look into that revenue source, and then we can dedicate those for some of these, like affordable. We did not had any revenue to put into our agri-hood project, basically. We are taking 15 million, reinvesting that 15 million. I wish we can have that revenue generation from employee tax, and I'm talking about affordable employee tax, like these corporations can easily afford it. And we seriously need to look into that, and then we can build our budgets for how we can manage rents, or how we can participate in Section 8 part of it through our own funding. And we need to come out of a solution, out of the box solution to alleviate these issues. And traffic management. And when I talk about traffic management, there was a slide about the smart cities. That is a big thing. Like, if we can make our traffic lights, I did attend detailed seminars on smart cities, and we can make we are sitting in the Silicon Valley and top of the world technology hub, and some of these European countries have implemented, Brussels has implemented those things, and which has reduced the carbon footprint, which has reduced the traffic congestions, and we should be looking at those. And not only Santa Clara, we should propagate our neighboring cities like Sunnyvale and San Jose and other cities to work on those as a collective goals and collective teams to come up with some of those solutions. So I'll stop with that so that we can discuss those in detail tomorrow. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. Other reactions to the strategic priorities, goals? Okay, so as we stop here for a moment and you reflect on the last year, and those of you who have been on the council for the last year, and those of you who are new on the council and looking in on the city organization and all the progress that's been made, what would you identify as the top one, the top two organizational accomplishments over the past year? We've heard several today throughout the day, including in the priorities update, and you might choose from that list, and you might move off those lists, and you might have your own accomplishments. Do you mind getting us started, and we can just work down the road this way?
Although I'm new to the council, but I have been attending some orientation meetings and other meetings with the staff, and knowing all that, what I didn't know earlier, some of the things, I would say one of the good things I think which has happened in last 1 year or so is the process management from the city management point of view.
Okay.
And it's a very good thing that we are looking at in holistic approach, like not only we are not trying to hide where we went wrong, but we are trying to fix where we went wrong, and we are trying to come up with the processes in the future so that we can fix these things and they can give us a good results down the line. So that's one of my top, and you mentioned two?
Two, you can have two, yes.
I think I would say procurement. That's part of the process, but procurement, I was surprised that a city of our size did not have a procurement department. And I'm not sure what our total budget of procurement of different sizes, like procurement other than public department.
Right.
But still, that's a huge, and I'm looking forward to what results we look at for those in the next year.
Excellent, very good.
Thank you, Sean. I would say that, I mean, there are a lot of things, and I didn't know what kind of order you were going to go in here, but I think some are obvious, and so I'm just trying to think out of the box a little bit. But one of them definitely I feel is the relaunch of My Santa Clara. I know we've talked about it a little bit today and several times, but I have. You know, I've used it myself several times, pushed it out as well as along with the city in terms of making people aware of how they can contact the city when issues come up. And we had an issue regarding graffiti out in the north side, out in the River Market area. And so it was a really good opportunity to promote My Santa Clara and how people could report and see the results. Excellent. You know, I mean, within 72 hours. I mean, it was. I actually reported something on a Friday, and by Monday it was gone. And so, and I took pictures and put it out there on Nextdoor, so people could see, you know, that it really works. The other thing, it may seem simple, but at the same time, I think it's really important. And what I have seen is Deanna's engagement on social media. And not just, you know, her weekly blog or biweekly blog, but, you know, in many places, you know, our city manager is always engaging with the public. And I think that's really important, that people see that she's reading and she's responding. And again, it helps that, you know, issue that we were talking about, you know, trust. And so if people see, you know, that she's responding, you know, and she's being open and transparent, they feel like there's a connection there. And so, you know, that approachability, I think, is very important as well. And seeing her do that has actually encouraged me to be more proactive as well in responding to issues that, you know, I see out there that need to be addressed, so that, you know, the rumors don't start, or, you know, the wrong information is disseminated. So, and I think that's really important, and that's definitely one thing that I've seen over the last year.
Excellent, very good. Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
I think from the goal setting that we had last year, we have come miles. And I think at the last one, it was like Chicken Little. Everybody thought we were going to go bankrupt. And there's just some things that were said about that goal-setting session. It was like, it just made me laugh, but it was how people perceived what was happening. I think when you have reform and change, it's not easy to do, and she owned it. I mean, she came in and she said, I'm looking at this, and just would communicate with us and say, as the policy decision makers, I need to clean this, I need to do this. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't easy. You are probably the best person I have. The decision to have you was just amazing, because that was always my thing, was the audit, and where is the money going, and what is happening, because when I came on council, it was so willy-nilly, it was scary. It really was scary. And you didn't know where the money was going, who was shaking hands with somebody, what deal was going on, and there was no cohesiveness. And the thing that I admire Deanna for is the fact that she did own it. If there was a problem, she took care of it and said, let's move forward. And she was criticized in the public out there. There were things said that were totally not true, but it was rumors were putting out there. And we had to like stop what was happening, stop that garbage. And it's just interesting to me that we lived it. We lived through it, and here we are again, and I feel like we're at the next process, at the next level. And we just keep getting better and better. But to have a city, to come into a city that was staffed from 1960 kind of world, to try to manage a staff and do what we're doing, because we became kind of a little traditional into a growth. And we took on massively huge projects. But we got it done. And I always say, we are mighty, but we're small, we're mighty, but we get it done. Somehow it gets done.
Yeah.
And there are people around other cities that, you know, I see in other like regional meetings, and they're jealous. They're like, wow, how do you do all that and still maintain, you know, your revenue streams or things of that nature, and build a $70 million reserve? I mean, it's like, really? It's unheard of. So I think I owe her a lot of credit for getting us to where we are and going through the reform, going through the change, and continue to do that. And she just surprises us every day, comes with something to, you know, so that we understand the workload. We were not aware of how bad, I mean, we knew. We didn't really want to kill staff, but we know how hard it is and difficult it is. Yeah. So she's made it so it's aligned. Everything has an agenda. Everything has a time-sensitive thing to it. But every day we get thrown something at us from outside sources, and then we have to fix it. But we're already on some kind of process. But I just think that we've been able to drive through things, and so I don't have two, I just have one big one. So, and I thank you, and I appreciate all of you. I mean, she brings on good people. You guys work really hard. You have given us really good information so we can make those policy decisions. But I know that there's more and more that you keep giving us so that we'll get just better and better and better. So I'm hoping that at the end of this, we'll have a big 4th of July party. Right, Deanna?
Mayor Gilmore?
Thank you. Mine are a little bit shorter than that, but so overreaching. I think that I see really two major accomplishments that have happened. I'm not just in the last year, but since we hired our new city manager and the new management team combined with our existing city departments. I think our goal, since we have this new administration, was to really understand the financial operations and performance of the city and the Stadium Authority and Silicon Valley Power. So that's what we were trying to get a true understanding of how we were operating and what financial positions we were in. And I think that is the #1 goal that we have achieved this last year, which is evident by the presentation as to our current state of the city and the state of the organization. But what's even more important is that, for the way I see it, our second most important goal was to reform the city, the SVP, and the Stadium Authority, to reform the operational, organizational, and management, and to identify where the weaknesses and gaps are. And we've seen that, and we're continuing to see it. And it's difficult. Reform is difficult, as Councilmember Davis said. It's difficult. It's messy. We take a lot of criticism, but when you start to see the results, and we're starting to see the results of really the self-assessment of the city, and our ultimate goal is to bring quality, efficient services, first-class services to our residents who deserve it. Yeah. And so we're doing all this work, and as Councilmember Davis said, we take a lot of criticism. The staff, we take a lot, but it's okay because we're doing our job. We're doing our job, and we have, I feel, really, strong and very confident that we have a wonderful team here at City Hall to assist us You know, as was mentioned, we're part-time people. We all bring our own qualities to this job. But to assist us, because we all have the same goal of providing all these services to our residents, but we can't provide the great services unless we really take a good, hard, painful look of where we are and what we've came from. So I feel like that is what we have accomplished in the last year. We're not finished by any means, but we are really, I think, over the top of the hill and doing a great job. So thank you, everyone in our city, our staff, our new city manager, city management team, our city attorney. We have our new city attorney who's really helped us tremendously in reaching those goals as well, because it takes a village, and if you don't have everybody working together, it doesn't work. And I feel like we do have a real cohesive and consistent team now to really help us. So those are my comments.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember O'Neill.
Okay, thank you. So my comments are going to go from kind of the 30,000-foot level to maybe the 15,000-foot level. So somewhat along the lines of what Mayor Gilmore's saying, I think, you know, there's the biggest thing that we have to notice is that, and I've said this, and a number of you have heard me talk about when people that I knew that were either on council or worked for the city would talk about Santa Clara was so cutting edge. Well, in some ways, there were certain things that we did that were, that we were out there on the, and then there were other things, as Councilmember Davis referred to, maybe we were stuck back in the 1960s. So I think one of the huge changes has been, or accomplishments, is to begin to try to adapt the culture. I'm not talking about throwing out the culture. I think the culture was what a lot of people loved about Santa Clara, that small town feel, of a feeling of connection. But in some ways we were disconnected from some of the other realities and the ways of operating that would enable us to be able to do more for our residents in a more efficient manner. So I think, and it's, we use that phrase data-driven, that's one thing, but it's also being insightful, because you can have all the data in the world, but if you're not there, if you don't see the connections, if you don't see the patterns, all those things, you know, so you've got to bring some insight to it too. And that's where some of the intuitive, I used to say in my prior life, I'm either an intuitive analytical or an analytical intuitive. So, you know, so I think it's kind of, that is a huge thing, and for people to see in the workforce here and in the community that they can bring what they've got to the table, and it's not going to, they don't have to be afraid of that it's going to be welcomed, that we need everybody's total brain power and heart power and connection to make the kind of changes that we need. And when you see the level of the detail from each member of the staff who spoke was very articulate, knew what they were talking about. You know, they were able to back up what they were saying. I had a good sense that each of them knew in their department what they needed to do. Right. You know, and I always talked about, you know, many times, if you have to up your game, you know, you have to up your game to stay in the game. And I think that Santa Clara has been showing that we're upping our game. And I hope that everybody's on board and wants to stay in the game. Good. So for two of my particular favorites of things, one would be really bringing the internal audit program up to speed, and having seen the value of that in other organizations and in private enterprise, I know how incredibly important that is. And secondly, the procurement program, because to me that shows where we're really being a good steward of the public's resources. Excellent, very good. Thank you. And Councilmember Hardy.
It's been hard to make the transition of, it's really easy to criticize when you're on the outside. I know that. Oh, I knew that. And I knew that coming in because I said, oh, good, I won. Oh, crap. Because there's so much to deal with. Yeah. And there's so many different things that are going on. I think I like that we have an internal auditor and we're getting a handle on bringing things. I joke about I'm working at the school district and I'm dragging them into the 21st century kicking and screaming. I think we're in the same place. Yeah. And that's exciting. The struggles are always all the things we have to deal with that we wish we didn't. Yeah. And and making those work no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think using some of the same attitudes we have in our homes and with our own finances should carry over to what we do publicly.
Good, good, excellent, very good. Okay, so we have spent quite a bit of time together today, and we started this morning. Would you like to comment, Dan?
When you're ready, I have some closing slides.
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. So we spent a lot of time today together, and we heard from the city manager on the state of the organization, which started getting into accomplishments, gaps. We heard specific activities, actions, programs to address those gaps from HR, from procurement. We got an update from the other council appointees and the work plan from the city auditor and a little overview of services from the city attorney's office. And then we also talked about the pillars themselves and your strategic goals. Do you have any questions that come out of the discussion today? Any comments for staff? Anything that is unresolved at your point about anything you've heard today? And not that I'm looking for anything, I just want to make sure that we open the frame and make sure that you get all your comments and questions and have the opportunity to ask those. Are you all good in terms of today? Well, I'll let Deanna close us out for tomorrow then. We convene here at 9 a.m. again tomorrow. And
8:30.
Oh, I'm sorry, 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you for that. And then there will be, similar to last year, we'll hear from the departments and they will present in groups. So we'll start with the strategic support departments in IT and HR and so forth, and then we'll move through that. And after each grouping, open that up for council questions and discussion. And then we will move towards what we're calling aligning council priorities. And that's a chance for you all. How are we doing in terms of meeting our priorities? And then I'll be talking to staff, an opportunity for you to be introducing issues and things that you really want to focus in on. We've already started that a little bit here. So that'll be tomorrow, so I'll look forward to seeing you all at 8:30. And then at this point, question there from the public?
The city's website says it ends at 2, but then I heard otherwise.
I know that the agenda does say that we end at 2 tomorrow. Okay, so the goal is to end at 2 tomorrow. Okay, and we'll see how that all works out. But that is the plan right now, and we've mapped that out, and we'll just see how the day emerges tomorrow. So with that said, then I'll turn it over to Deanna to close out with her slides.
One of the opening slides that we used today had a quote about the council being the foundation of how we manage change, and I want to spend just a couple comments on that. In that, you are the leaders of this organization. And you shape the organization with your leadership. And we have engaged in a lot of number of reforms. You've seen the impact. And it starts with your leadership and the tone that you set and embracing the conversations that have been very candid today, hearing the status of the checkbook and blank checks. I can't get over that. I mean, but the fact that we're allowed to come forward and express that is certainly a tone that you have set, and that sets a lot up for open dialogue. You've also heard the status of the organization, and we started with some real data that shapes how we make decisions going forward. I want to offer solutions. I've raised some already throughout the session. In your packet, and some of these slides here, for instance, a slide like this is when I talked about the work plan and the stacked diagram. I want to start to work with the council when we take on new initiatives, that we take a hard look, and each department has their own, of what is on the horizon, so that we don't engage in a discussion of conflict, but rather one that's meaningful, of trade-offs and resource investments and how we use our time, knowing that our capacity is finite. It is not unlimited. We've talked about some areas where we need to shave down just because of high risk for our employees. And I want to start to introduce the work plan as a solution for managing forward. I'd also like for you to consider from here to tomorrow, as you hear the department updates, the pillars, the 2 recommendations that I've put on the table for you to consider and assess for fit, and how we would manage forward, as well as some of the ideas that came forward from the council and how to integrate those. I think we're well positioned to make informed decisions. We've offered some good data, but there's more data, and it starts where I was at earlier as well. The fact that the council is engaging at this level and stayed engaged all day, it looked like you were all very focused on the information that we were presenting, is the reason why, when I forward a little bit, we have high community research statistics. We have high-ranking community results. We know this. We've tested twice through statistically valid community research. 64% said that we are doing an excellent or positive job. 88% of respondents believe that the quality of life in Santa Clara is positive or excellent. And 63% of those polled believe that the city is headed in the right direction. And last, overall, we get a big thumbs up across the board with our departments. This is the baseline for which all of this good work starts. And so again, while we looked below the hood or below the soil, we have a solid foundation to start, but as you, the leaders who are shaping the organization, it's very well understood you want to get more out of the capacity that we have, the organization that we have, and we just need to continue to engage in these conversations, because all of our goal is to continue these high markings and increase them where we can. So I wanted to remind you, solid, good foundation, and that comes from our community and the city council and our workforce. That's it.
Very good. Mayor, you can close us out, formally close the meeting.
All right, well, thank you all for hanging in with us today and preparing these reports. It's obvious that so much work, time, effort, and energy went into preparing these to make them very informative and very understandable, not just for the council, but for the community as a whole. And I know we're live streaming this as well, and it'll be available for the community to watch. So thank you very much. We look forward to tomorrow. Everyone get a lot of rest this evening so we can have very spirited discussions tomorrow, and we'll add in more public presentations.
We will do that.
So
yes.
Thank you. I think, do we need a motion to adjourn the meeting, or are we okay?
We okay?
Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. We'll just be cautious.
Okay.
Motion second to adjourn. Any discussion? You want to stay longer? No. All those in favor to adjourn, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Meeting's adjourned. See you tomorrow. Thank you.